Chapter 18. Moksha Sannyasa Yoga. Conclusion. Sannyasa and Tyaga distinguished. In the present discourse the Lord proceeds to teach, by way of summing up, the doctrine of the whole of the Gita Shastra, as also the whole of the Vedic doctrine. Verily, the whole of the doctrine taught in the preceding discourses is to be found in this discourse. Arjuna, however, asks to know only the distinction in meaning between sannyasa and tyaga.
अष्टादशोऽध्यायः मोक्षसंन्यासयोगः अर्जुन उवाच संन्यासस्य महाबाहो तत्त्वमिच्छामि वेदितुम् त्यागस्य च हृषीकेश पृथक् केशिनिषूदन.
Translation. Arjuna said, Of sannyasa, O mighty armed, I desire to know the truth, O Hrishikesha, as also of tyaga, severally, O slayer of Kesin. Sannyasa, the connotation of the term sannyasa. Tyaga, the connotation of the term tyaga. Severally, as distinguished from each other. Kesin was an asur whom the Lord, the son of Vasudeva, slew, and the Lord is therefore addressed as Kesinishudana, the slayer of Kesin. The words sannyasa and tyaga have been used here and there in the preceding discourses, their connotations, however, not being clearly distinguished. Wherefore, with a view to determining them, the Lord addresses Arjuna, who desired to know of them, as follows.
Shri Bhagavanuvacha Kamyanam karmanam nyasam sannyasam kavayo viduhu Sarva karma phalatyagam prahustyagam vichakshanaha.
Translation. The blessed Lord said, Sages understand sannyasa to be the renouncement of interested works, the abandonment of the fruits of all works, the learned declare, is tyaga. A few sages understand by sannyasa the abandonment of kamya karmane, of works, such as the Ashvamedha, horse sacrifice, accompanied with a desire for fruits. The learned declare that tyaga means abandonment of the fruits of all the works that are performed, nitya and naimittika, ordinary and extraordinary duties, i.e., of the fruits that may accrue to the performer. The abandonment of interested works and the abandonment of fruits, of works, being intended to be expressed by the two words, the meaning of the words sannyasa and tyaga is in any way one and the same so far as the general idea is concerned, namely, abandonment. They are not quite so distinct in meaning as the words jar and cloth. Objection. The nitya and naimittika works, ordinary and extraordinary duties, are said to produce no fruits. How is it that the abandoning of their fruits is here spoken of? It is like speaking of the abandoning of a barren woman's son. Answer. No such objection may be raised here, since, in the opinion of the Lord, ordinary and occasional duties produce their own fruits, as he will show in 18.12, where, indeed, while teaching that sannyasins alone, those alone who have renounced all desire for the fruits of works, have no connection whatever with those fruits, the Lord teaches also that those who are not sannyasins will have to reap the fruits of the ordinary works which they are bound to perform. To explain the two words as meaning two altogether distinct things would be in contravention to the accepted usage. As explained here, the two words convey the same general idea with some distinction. Should the ignorant perform works or not?
त्याज्यं दोषवदित्येके कर्म प्राहुर्मनीषिणः यज्ञदानतपः कर्म न त्याज्यमिति चापरे.
Translation: that action should be abandoned as an evil, some philosophers declare, while others declare that acts of sacrifice, gift and austerity should not be given up. Some philosophers, following the doctrine of the Sankhyas, etc., declare that all action should be given up as an evil, even by those who are fit for karma yoga. As an evil, this may be interpreted to mean either that all karma should be given up as involving evil since it is the cause of bondage, or that it should be given up like passion and other such evil tendencies. With regard to the same class of persons, viz., those who are fit for karma yoga, others say that the acts of sacrifice, gift and austerity ought not to be abandoned. It is the karmayogins that form the subject of discussion here, and it is with reference to them that these divergent views are held, but not with reference to the Janana. Nishthas, wisdom devotees, the sannyasins who have risen above all worldly concerns. Those persons who have been raised above the path of karma in 3.3 are not spoken of in this connection. Objection: just as the persons who are qualified for works form the subject of discussion here in the section where the whole doctrine of the Sastra is summed up, though their path has already been specified in 3.3, so also the Sankhyas, the devotees of wisdom, may also form the subject of discussion here. Answer: no, because of the inconceivability of their abandoning of duty from delusion or on account of pain. To explain the Sankhyas, men of knowledge perceive in the self no pain whatever arising from bodily trouble, since desire, pain, etc., are said to be the attributes of kshetra or matter. Wherefore they do not abandon action for fear of bodily trouble and pain. Neither do they perceive action in the self. If they could ever perceive action in the self, then it would be possible to imagine their abandoning of obligatory works from delusion. In fact, they abandon works because they see that action pertains to gunas and think, I do nothing at all. 5.8. How those men who know the truth renounce works has been described in 5.13, etc. Therefore it is only the other class of persons who are ignorant of the true nature of the self and are qualified for works, and in whose case the supposition of the abandoning of duty from delusion or for fear of bodily trouble is possible. It is only these that are censured as tamasic and rajasic relinquishers, tyagans, in order to praise the abandoning of the fruits of action resorted to by the followers of works who do not know the self. And the sannyasin proper has been distinguished by the Lord, when defining the man who has transcended gunas as one, renouncing all undertakings, who is silent, content with anything, homeless, steady-minded. And the Lord will hereafter describe his devotion as that supreme consummation of knowledge. 18.50. Thus, it is not the sannyasins, who are the devotees of wisdom, that are referred to here. It is only the abandoning of the fruits of works that, by reason of its being sattvic, is spoken of as sannyasa in contradistinction to the tamasic and rajasic, abandoning of works, but not sannyasa proper, that preeminent renunciation of all works. Objection: since 18.11 states the reason why renunciation of all action is an impossibility, it is only the sannyasa proper that is spoken of in this connection. Answer: no, because the passage referred to as a statement of the reason is only intended to praise something else enjoined. Just as the passage on abandonment of peace closely follows, is only a praise of the abandonment of the fruits of works, since it is addressed to Arjuna who is ignorant of the self and who could not therefore follow the several paths previously spoken of, so also, the passage here referred to goes to praise the abandonment of the fruits of action. It is not possible for anyone to point out an exception to the proposition. Renouncing all actions by thought and self-controlled, the embodied one rests happily in the nine-gated city, neither at all acting nor causing to act. 5.13 Wherefore these alternative views regarding samanyasa and tyaga concern those persons only for whom works are intended. On the other hand, the Sankhyas, those who see the Supreme Reality, have only to follow the path of knowledge, accompanied with the renunciation of all works, and they have nothing else to do, and do not therefore form the subject of the alternative views set forth here. And so we established this proposition while commenting on 2.21 and at the commencement of the third discourse. The Lord's decree is that the ignorant should perform works. Now, as to these divergent views.
निश्चयं शृणु मे तत्र त्यागे भरतसत्तमा त्यागो हि पुरुषव्याघ्र त्रिविधः सम्प्रकीर्तितः.
Translation. Learn from me the truth about this abandonment, O best of the Bharatas. Abandonment, verily, O best of men, has been declared to be of three kinds. Do you learn from my words the truth as to the alternatives of abandonment and renunciation referred to? Abandonment, tyaga, the Lord has used this single word here, implying that the meaning of tyaga and samanyasa is one and the same. Of three kinds, tamasic, etc. Declared in the Shastras. Because it is hard to know the fact that the threefold, tamasic, etc., abandonment denoted by the words tyaga and samanyasa is possible in the case of him alone who does not know the self and for whom works are intended, not in the case of him who sees the Supreme Reality. Therefore no one, other than myself, is able to teach the real truth about the subject. Wherefore, learn from me what the Lord's decree is as to the real teaching of the Shastra. What is the decree then? The Lord says,
यज्ञदान तपः कर्म न त्याज्यं कार्यमेव तत् यज्ञोदानं तपश्चैव पावनानि मनीषिणाम्.
Translation. Practice of worship, gift, and austerity should not be given up. It is quite necessary. Worship, gift and austerity are the purifiers of the wise. The three sorts of action should be performed, for they cause purity in the wise, i.e., in those who have no desire for fruits. The obligatory works should be performed without attachment.
एतान्यपि तु कर्माणि सङ्गं त्यक्त्वा फलानि च कर्तव्यानीति मे पार्थ निश्चितं मतमुत्तमम्.
Translation. But even those actions should be performed, setting aside attachment and the fruits. This, O son of Pritha, is my firm and highest belief. Those actions, and see, the acts of worship, gift and austerity which have been said to be purifiers, should be performed, setting aside attachment for them and abandoning their fruits. A proposition was started in the words, "Learn from me the truth about this," 18.4, and as a reason for it, it has been stated that worship, etc., are the purifiers, so that the words, "even those actions should be performed. This is my firm and highest belief," form a mere conclusion of the proposition started in 18.4. "Even those actions should be performed" cannot be a fresh proposition, for it is better to construe the passage as related to the immediate subject of the present section. The word "even" implies that these actions should be performed by a seeker of liberation, though they form the cause of bondage in the case of one who has an attachment for the actions and a desire for their fruits. The words "even those" cannot certainly refer to actions other than the acts of worship, etc. But others explain, since obligatory, nitya, actions bear no fruits, it is not right to speak of setting aside attachment and the fruits. Therefore in the words "even those actions," etc., the Lord teaches that even those works which are intended to secure objects of desire, i.e., even karma or interested works, as opposed to nitya or obligatory works, should be performed. How much more than the obligatory acts of worship, gift and austerity? It is wrong to say so, for it has been declared here that even obligatory actions are productive of fruits. In the words, worship, gift and austerity are the purifiers of the wise, 18.5. To a seeker of liberation who would give up even the obligatory works, looking upon them as the cause of bondage, where is an occasion to engage in interested works? Even these actions cannot refer to interested, kamya, works, inasmuch as these have been despised as constituting an inferior path, 2.49, and decisively declared to be the cause of bondage, and are too far removed from the present section. Tamasic and rajasic renunciations of works. Therefore for a seeker of liberation who is ignorant and is, therefore, bound to perform works,
नियतस्य तु सन्न्यासः कर्मणो नोपपद्यते मोहात्तस्य परित्यागस्तामसः परिकीर्तितः.
Translation. Verily, the abandonment of an obligatory duty is not proper. The abandonment thereof from ignorance is declared to be tamasic. Not proper, since it is admitted to be a purifier in the case of an ignorant man. To hold that a duty is obligatory and then to abandon it involves a self-contradiction. Therefore, this sort of abandonment is due to ignorance and is said to be tamasic, inasmuch as ignorance is tamas. Moreover,
दुःखमित्येव यत्कर्म कायक्लेशभयात् त्यजेत् सकृत्वा राजसं त्यागं नैव त्यागफलं लभेत्.
Translation. Whatever act one may abandon because it is painful, from fear of bodily trouble, he practices rajasic abandonment, and he shall obtain no fruit whatever of abandonment. He does not obtain moksha, which is the fruit of the renunciation of all actions accompanied with wisdom. Renunciation in works is sattvic. What then is the sattvic abandonment? The Lord says,
कार्यमित्येव यत्कर्म नियतं क्रियते अर्जुन संगं त्यक्त्वा फलं चैव सत्यागः सात्विको मतः.
Translation. Whatever obligatory work is done by Arjuna merely because it ought to be done, by abandoning attachment and also the fruit, that abandonment is deemed to be sattvic. Abandoning, etc. These words of the Lord form, as we have said, the authority which declares that obligatory, nitya, works produce fruits. Or thus, an ignorant man may even suppose that though the fruits of obligatory works are not declared in the scripture, the obligatory works, when performed, do produce their fruits for the doer in the form of self-regeneration, or by way of warding off pratyavaya or the sin of non-performance. But even this supposition is prevented by the words, abandoning the fruits, hence the appropriateness. That abandonment, the abandoning of all attachment for, and of the fruits of, obligatory works. Objection: it is the threefold abandonment of works referred to as sannyasa, 18.7, that forms the subject of the present section, 18.4, etc. Out of the three, the rajasic and tamasic sorts of abandonment of works have been treated of. How is it that the abandonment of attachment and of the fruits of works is spoken of as the third? It is something like saying, 3 Brahmanas have come, 2 of them are proficient in Shadangas or the 6 auxiliary sciences, and the third is a Kshatriya. Answer: no such objection can be raised here, for the object of this section is to praise the abandonment of the fruits of works as compared with the abandonment of works, i.e., by comparing the two abandonments, both being alike abandonments. In fact, the abandonment of works and the abandonment of desire for the fruits do agree in so far as they alike imply abandonment. Accordingly, by despising the two sorts of the abandonment of works as rajasic and tamasic abandonment, the abandonment of desire for the fruits of the works is praised as being the sattvic abandonment, in the words that abandonment is deemed to be sattvic. From renunciation in works to renunciation of all works. When the man who is qualified for karma yoga performs obligatory works without attachment and without a longing for results, his inner sense, antahkarana, unsoiled by desire for results and regenerated by the performance of obligatory works, becomes pure. When pure and tranquil, the inner sense is fit for contemplation of the self. Now, with a view to teach how the man whose inner sense has been purified by the performance of obligatory works and who is prepared to acquire the self-knowledge may gradually attain to jnananishtha or devotion in knowledge, the Lord proceeds as follows.
न द्वेष्ट्य कुशलं कर्म कुशलेनानुषज्यते त्यागी सत्त्वसमाविष्टो मेधावी छिन्न संशयः.
Translation: he hates not evil action, nor is he attached to a good one, he who has abandoned, pervaded by sattva and possessed of wisdom, his doubts cut asunder. Evil action, the kamya karma, the interested action, which becomes the cause of samsara by producing a body. He does not hate evil action, thinking of what avail is it. Good one, nitya karma, obligatory action. He cherishes no attachment for it by way of thinking that it leads to moksha, by purifying the heart and thereby conducing to knowledge and to devotion in knowledge. Of whom is this said? Of him who has abandoned attachment and desire, and who, having abandoned attachment to action and desire for its fruit, performs obligatory works, nitya karma. When does he hate no evil action? When is he not attached to a good one? When he is permeated with sattva, which causes a discriminative knowledge of the self and the not-self. As he is permeated with sattva, he becomes gifted with wisdom, with knowledge of self. As he becomes possessed of wisdom, his doubt caused by avidya is cut asunder by the conviction that to abide in the true nature of the self is alone the means of attaining the highest bliss, and that there is no other means. That is to say, when a man who is qualified for Karma Yoga practices Karma Yoga in the manner described above and thereby becomes gradually refined in the self, Antahkarana, then he knows himself to be that self, who is devoid of birth or any other change of condition, is immutable. He renounces all action in thought, remains without acting or causing others to act. He attains devotion in wisdom. He attains freedom from action. Thus, the purpose of the Karma Yoga described above has been taught in this verse. Renunciation of fruits is alone possible for the ignorant. For the unenlightened man, on the other hand, who wears a body by way of identifying himself with it, who not yet disabused of the notion that the self is the agent of action, firmly believes that he is himself the agent. For him who is thus qualified for Karma Yoga, abandonment of all works is impossible, so that his duty lies only in performing prescribed works by abandoning their fruits, not in abandoning those works. To impress this point, the Lord proceeds thus.
न हि देहभृता शक्यं त्यक्तुं कर्मण्यशेषतः यस्तु कर्मफलत्यागी सत्यागीत्यभिधीयते.
Translation. Verily, it is not possible for an embodied being to abandon actions completely. He who abandons the fruits of actions is verily said to be an abandoner. An embodied being, a body-wearer. Idoti, he who identifies himself with the body. No man or discrimination can be called a body-wearer, for it has been pointed out, 2.21, etc., that such a man does not concern himself, in actions, as their agent. So the meaning is, it is not possible for an ignorant man to abandon actions completely. When an ignorant man who is qualified for action performs obligatory works, abandoning merely the desire for the fruits of his actions, he is said to be an abandoner, tyagin, though he is a performer of works. This the title, abandoner, is applied to him for courtesy's sake. Accordingly, the abandonment of all actions is possible for him alone who, realizing the Supreme Reality, is not a body-wearer, i.e., does not regard the body as the self. Effects of the true renunciation after death. Now, what is the benefit which accrues from the abandonment of all actions? The Lord says.
अनिष्टमिष्टं मिश्रं च त्रिविधं कर्मणः फलम् भवत्यत्यागिनां प्रेत्य न तु सन्न्यासिनां क्वचित्.
Translation. The threefold fruit of action, evil, good, and mixed, accrues after death to non-abandoners, but never to abandoners. Fruit, brought forth by the operation of various external factors. LT is a doing of avidya. It is like the glamour cast by a juggler's art, very delusive, inhering, to all appearance, in the innermost self. By its very etymology, the word phala, fruit, implies something that vanishes, something unsubstantial. Action, karma, dharma and adharma. Evil, such as hell, narka, the animal kingdom, etc. Good, such as the devas. Mixed, good and evil mixed together in one, the humanity. These three sorts of fruits accrue after death to non-abandoners, to the unenlightened, to the followers of Karma Yoga, to the abandoners, sannyasins, not strictly so called, but never to the real sannyasins, engaged exclusively in the path of knowledge, janananistha, and belonging to the highest order of sannyasins, the Paramahamsa Parivrajkas. Indeed, exclusive devotion to right knowledge cannot but destroy avidya and other seeds of samsara. That is to say, those who perform works without desire for their fruits will necessarily reap, after death, the fruits of their respective actions. Accordingly, a complete abandonment of all works is possible for him alone who has attained to right knowledge, inasmuch as he sees that action and its accessories and its results are all ascribed to the self by avidya. But, for the unenlightened man identifying himself with the body, etc., which constitute action, its agent and accessories, complete abandonment of action is not possible. This truth, the Lord proceeds to teach in the following verses. Factors in the production of an act.
Panchaitani mahabaho karanani nibodha me Sankhye krutante proktani siddhaye sarvakarmanam.
Translation. These 5 factors in the accomplishment of agial action, know you from me, O mighty armed, as taught in the Sankhya which is the end of action. These, which are going to be mentioned. Learn, this exhortation is intended to secure steady attention on the part of the hearer to what follows, as well as to indicate the difference, in the view which is going to be presented, as to the nature of those things. In the words taught in the Sankhya, the Lord praises them, as they are things that ought to be known. Sankhya, Vedanta, the Upanishads, in which all the things that have to be known are expounded. It is qualified by the epithet, Kritayanta, the end of action, that which puts an end to all action, karma. The verses 2.46 and 4.33 teach that all action ceases when the knowledge of the self arises, so that the Vedanta, which imparts self-knowledge, is the end of action.
Adhishthanam tatha karta karanam cha prithagvidham vividhascha prithak cheshta daivam chaivatra panchamam.
Translation. The seat and actor and the various organs, and the several functions of various sorts, and the divinity also, the 5th among these. The seat, the body which is the seat of desire, hatred, happiness, misery, knowledge and the like, i.e., the seat of their manifestation actor, the enjoyer, partaking of the character of the upadhi with which it may be associated. The various organ, such as the sense of hearing, by which to perceive sound, etc. Functions of the air, vayu, such as outbreathing and inbreathing. Of various arts, 12 in number. Divinity, such as the Aditya and other gods by whose aid the eye and other organs discharge their functions.
Sharirabang manobhiryat karma prarabhate naraha Nyayam va viparitam va panchaite tasya hetavaha.
Translation. Whatever action a man does by the body, speech and mind, right or the opposite, these 5 are its causes. Right, not opposed to dharma, taught in the Sastra. The opposite, what is opposed to dharma and opposed to Sastra. Even those actions, the act of twinkling and the like, which are the necessary conditions of life, are denoted by the expression, the right or the opposite, since they are but the effects of the past dharma and adharma. Its causes, the causes of every action. Objection, the body, etc., 18.14, are necessary factors in every action. Why do you speak of a distinction in actions, in the words, whatever action a man does by the body, speech or mind? Answer, this objection cannot be urged against. In the performance of every action, whether enjoyed or forbidden, one of the three body, speech or mind has a more prominent share than the rest, while seeing, bearing, and other activities, which form mere concomitants of life, are subordinate to the activity of that one. All actions are thus classed into three groups and are spoken of as performed by body, or speech, or mind. Even at the time of fruition, the fruit of an action is enjoyed through the instrumentality of body, speech and mind, one of them being more prominent than the rest. Hence no gainsaying of the assertion that all the five are the causes of action. 18.14. The agency of the self is an illusion.
तत्रैवं सति कर्तारमात्मानं केवलं तु यः पश्यत्यकृतबुद्धित्वं न स पश्यति दुर्मतिः.
Translation. Now, such being the case, verily, he who is untrained in understanding, looks on the pure self as the agent, that man of perverted intelligence sees not. Now, with reference to what we are speaking of. Such being the case, every action being accomplished by the five causes described above. Now this shows the reason why the person here referred to is said to be a man of perverted intelligence. The unenlightened one, in virtue of his ignorance, identifies the self with the five causes and looks even he who, while maintaining the existence of the disembodied self, looks upon the pure self as the agent, is a man of untrained understanding. He does not therefore see the truth about the self and action. He is therefore a man of perverted intelligence. His intelligence takes a wrong direction, is vicious, continually leading to birth and death. Though seeing, yet he does not see the truth, like a man whose timira-affected eye sees many moons, or like one who regards that the moon moves when the clouds are in motion, or like a man who, seated in a vehicle, regards himself as running when it is the others, the bearers, that run. Realization of the non-agency of the self leads to absolution from the effects of all works. Who then is the wise man that sees rightly? The answer follows.
यस्य नाहङ्कृतो भावो बुद्धिर्यस्य न लिप्यते हत्वापि स इमान् लोकान् न हन्ति न निबध्यते.
Translation. He who is free from egotistic notion, whose mind is not tainted, though he kills these creatures, he kills not, he is not bound. He whose mind has been well trained in the scriptures, well trained by a master's instructions, and well trained in the sound principles of reasoning, is free from the egotistic notion that I am the agent. He thinks thus, it is these five, the body, etc., ascribed to the self through avidya, that are the causes of all action, not I. I am the witness of their actions. I am without breath, without mind, pure, higher than the indestructible which is supreme, mund. Up. 2.12. I am pure and immutable. He whose antakarna, buddhi, which is an upadhi of the self, is not tainted, does not repent thus, I have done this, thereby I shall go to narka, hell. He is wise, he sees rightly, though he kills all these living creatures. He commits no act of killing, nor is he bound by the fruit of adharma as an effect of that act. Objection, even supposing that this is intended as a mere praise, the statement that, though he kills all these creatures, he does not kill, involves a self-contradiction. Answer: this objection cannot stand, for The statement can be explained by distinguishing the two standpoints of worldly conception and absolute truth. From the standpoint of worldly conception, which consists in thinking, I am the killer, by identifying the self with the physical body etc., the Lord says, though he kills, and from the standpoint of absolute truth explained above, he says, he kills not, he is not bound. Thus both are quite explicable. Objection: the self does act in conjunction with the body, etc., as implied by the use of the word pure in 18:16, he who looks on the pure self as the agent. Answer: this contention is untenable, for the self being, by nature, immutable, we cannot conceive him to act in conjunction with the body, etc. What is subject to change can alone conjoin with others, and thus conjoined can become the agent. But there can be no conjunction of the immutable self with anything whatsoever, and he cannot therefore act in conjunction with another. Thus, the isolated condition, being natural condition, and his immutability is quite evident to all, as taught by the Shruti, Smriti and reason. In the Gita itself, for instance, it has been over and over again taught in the words, he is unchangeable, 2.25, actions are wrought by gunas, 3.27, though dwelling in the body, he acts not, 13.31. And the same thing is also taught in the passages of the Shruti such as, it meditates as it were, it moves as it were. By reasoning also we may establish the same thus. That the self is an entity without parts, is not dependent on another, and is immutable, is the royal road, i.e., is undisputed. Even if it be admitted that the self is subject to change, he should only be subject to a change of his own. The actions of the body can never be attributed to the agency of the self. Indeed, the action of one cannot go to another that has not done it. And what is attributed to the self by avidya cannot really pertain to him, in the same way that the mother of pearl cannot become silver, or, to take another illustration, in the same way that surface and dirt ascribed by children through ignorance to Akasha cannot really pertain to Akasha. Accordingly, any changes that may take place in the body, etc., belong to them only, not to the self. Wherefore, it is but right to say that in the absence of egotism and of all taint in the mind, the wise man neither kills nor is bound. Having started this proposition in the words, he slays not, nor is he slain, 2.19, having stated in 2.20 as the reason there for the immutability of the self, having in the beginning of the Sastra, 2.21, briefly taught that to a wise man there is no need for works, and having introduced the subject here and there in the middle and expatiated upon it, the Lord now concludes it in the words that the wise man kills not, nor is bound, with a view to sum up the teaching of the Sastra. Thus, in the absence of the egotistic feeling of embodied existence, the Samnyasins renounce all avidya-generated action, and it is therefore right to say that the threefold fruit of action, evil, good and mixed, 18.12, does not accrue to the Samnyasins, and the further conclusion also is inevitable that quite the reverse is the lot of others. This teaching of the Gita Sastra has been concluded here. To show that this essence of the whole Vedic teaching should be investigated and understood by wise men of trained intelligence, it has been expounded by us here and there in several sections in accordance with the scripture, Sastra, and reason. The impulses to action. Now will be mentioned the impulses to action.
ज्ञानं ज्ञेयं परिज्ञाता त्रिविधा कर्म चोदना करणं कर्म कर्तेति त्रिविधः कर्म संग्रहः.
Translation. Knowledge, the object known, the knower, form, the threefold impulse to action, the organ, the end, the agent, from the threefold base of action. Knowledge, any knowledge, knowledge in general. Similarly, the object known refers to objects in general, to all objects of knowledge. The knower, the experiencer, partaking of the nature of the upadhi, a creature of avidya. This triad forms the threefold impulse to all action, to action in general. Indeed, performance of action with a view to avoid a thing or to obtain another and so on, is possible only when there is a conjunction of the three, knowledge, etc. The actions accomplished by the five causes of action, by the body, etc. and grouped into three classes according to their respective seats: speech, mind, body are all traceable to the interplay of the organ, etc. And this is taught in the second part of the verse. The organ, that by which something is done, external organs being the organ of hearing, etc., and the internal organs being buddhi, intelligence, etc. The end, that which is sought for, that which is reached through action by the agent. The agent, he who sets the organs going, partaking of the nature of the upadhi, in which he works. In these three all action inheres, and they are therefore said to form the threefold basis of action. The impulses are threefold according to the gunas. Inasmuch as action, the several factors of action, and the fruit, are all made up of the gunas, the Lord now proceeds to teach the threefold distinction of each, according to the three distinct gunas, sattva, rajas and tamas.
ज्ञानं कर्म च कर्ता च त्रिधैव गुणभेदतः प्रोच्यते गुणसङ्ख्याने यथा वच्छृणुतान्यपि.
Translation. Knowledge and action, and the agent, are said in the science of gunas to be of three kinds only, according to the distinction in gunas. Hear you duly of them. Action, karma. Karma here means action, kriya. It is not used in the technical sense of the word denoting the object of an action, what is sought to be attained by means of action, agent, the performer of acts. They are of three kinds only. This restriction is intended to imply the absence of distinctions other than that caused by the gunas. Gunas, such as sattva. The science of gunas here referred to is Kapila's system of philosophy. Even Kapila's science of gunas is certainly an authority so far as it concerns gunas and their experiencer, bhoktri. Though they are opposed to us as regards the supreme truth, the oneness or non-duality of Brahman, still the followers of Kapila are of acknowledged authority in the exposition of the functions of gunas and of their products, and their science is therefore accepted here as an authority as serving to extol the teaching which follows. Hence no inconsistency. Here, etc., pay attention to the teaching which follows here, concerning knowledge and the rest, as well as their various distinctions caused by different gunas as I describe them duly, according to science, according to reason. Sattvic knowledge. Here follows the threefold character of knowledge.
सर्वभूतेषु येनैकं भावमव्ययमीक्षते अविभक्तं विभक्तेषु तज्ज्ञानं विद्धि सात्विकम्.
Translation. That by which a man sees the one indestructible reality in all beings, inseparate in the separated, that knowledge know you as sattvic. Reality, bhava, the one self. Indestructible, which cannot be exhausted either in itself or in its properties, kutastha or immutable. All beings, from avyakta, or the unmanifested matter, down to the sthavara or unmoving objects. That reality, the self, is not different in different bodies, like the akasha, the self admits of no division. Know you this direct and right perception of the non-dual self as sattvic. Rajasic knowledge. The dualistic fallacious systems of philosophy are rajasic and tamasic, and therefore they cannot directly bring about the cessation of samsara.
पृथक्त्वेन तु यज्ञानं नानाभावान् पृथग्विधान् वेत्ति सर्वेषु भूतेषु तज्ज्ञानं विद्धि राजसम्.
Translation. But that knowledge which by differentiation sees in all the creatures various entities of distinct kinds, that knowledge know you as rajasic. By differentiation, regarding them as different in different bodies, entities, selves, which sees, etc., this should be interpreted to mean, by which one sees, since knowledge cannot be an agent. Tamasic knowledge.
यत्तु कृत्स्नवदेकस्मिन् कार्ये सत्तमहैतुकम् अतत्त्वार्थवदल्पं च तत्तामसमुदाहृतम्.
Translation. But that which clings to one single ft as if it were all, without reason, having no real object, and narrow, that is declared to be tamasic. Tamasic knowledge is engrossed in one single effect, such as the body or an external idol, as though it is all-comprehensive, thinking, this body is the self, or, that is God, and that there is nothing higher than that. Jiva, soul, for example, dwelling in the body is regarded by the naked sramanakas, etc., as being of the size of that body, and the Isvara is regarded, by some, to be the mere stone or piece of wood. This knowledge is not founded on reason and does not perceive things as they are. Because it is not founded on reason, it is narrow, as extending over a limited area, or as producing very small results. This knowledge is said to be tamasic, because it is found only in tamasic beings possessing no faculty of discrimination. Sattvic action. The threefold nature of action is next described.
नियतं सङ्गरहितम् अरागद्वेषतः कृतम् अफलप्रेप्सुना कर्म यत्तत् सात्विकमुच्यते.
Translation. An action which is ordained, which is free from attachment, which is done without love or hatred by one not desirous of the fruit, that action is declared to be sattvic. Ordained, obligatory, nitya. It is not an action done by one impelled by love or hatred. Rajasic action.
यत्तु कामेप्सुना कर्म साहङ्कारेण वा पुनः क्रियते बहुलायासं तद्राजसमुदाहृतम्.
Translation. But the action which is done by one longing for pleasures, or done by the egotistic, costing much trouble, that is declared to be rajasic. Pleasures, as fruits of action. The egotistic, not as distinguished from one who has realized the true nature of the self, who is absolutely free from egotism, but as distinguished from one who is free from pride in the sense in which an ordinary Srotriya, a devotee of the Vedic religion, of the world is expected to be free from egotism. For, he who is absolutely without egotism, i.e., one who has realized the self, cannot even be imagined to long for the fruit of an action, or to do an action costing much trouble. Even the doer of a sattvic action is ignorant of the self and is egotistic, much more so are the rajasic and tamasic doers. In common parlance, a Srotriya who is ignorant of the self is said to be free from egotism. We say, he is a modest, unegotistic, Brahmana. It is only from this class of persons that the doer of a rajasic action is distinguished as being egotistic. Tamasic action.
Anubandham kshayam himsa anapekshya cha paurusham mohadarabhyate karma yattat tamasamuchyate.
Translation. The action which is undertaken from delusion, without regarding the consequence, loss, injury, and ability, that is declared to be tamasic. Loss of power and of wealth accruing from the action done. Injury to living beings. Ability, one's own ability to complete the work point. Sattvic agent. Now the Lord proceeds to treat of the distinction among agents.
Mukta sango nahambadi dhrutyutsaha samanvitaha siddhya siddhyor nirvikarah karta sattvika uchyate.
Translation. Free from attachment, not given to egotism, endued with firmness and vigor, unaffected in success and failure, an agent is said to be sattvic. Success, attainment of the fruit of the action done. Unaffected, as having been impelled to act merely by the authority of the sastra, not by a desire for the fruits. Rajasic agent.
Ragi karma phala prepsur labdho himsatmako shuchihi harsha shokanvitah karta rajasah parikirtitaha.
Translation. Passionate, desiring to attain the fruit of action, greedy, cruel, impure, subject to joy and sorrow, such an agent is said to be rajasic. Greedy, thirsting for another's property, not giving away one's own property to worthy persons, etc. Cruel, doing harm to others. Impure, devoid of external and internal purity. Subject to joy and its sorrow, rejoicing on the attainment of what is desirable, and feeling sorry on the attainment of what is not desirable or on having to part with what is desirable. Joy or sorrow may arise at the success or failure of the action in which he is engaged. Tamasic agent.
Ayuktah prakritah stabdah shatho naishkrutiko lasaha Vishadi dirgha sutri cha karta tamasa uchyate.
Translation. Unsteady, vulgar, unbending, deceptive, wicked, indolent, desponding, and procrastinating, such an agent is said to be tamasic. Vulgar, quite uncultured in intellect, buddhi, who is like a child. Unbending, not bowing like a stick to anybody. Deceptive, concealing his real power. Wicked, setting others at variance with each other. Indolent, not doing even what ought to be done. Desponding, always depressed in spirit. Procrastinating point, postponing duties too long, always sluggish, not doing even in a month what ought to be done today or tomorrow. Intellect and firmness are threefold. According to Gunas.
Buddhe bhedam dhruteshchaiva gunatastrividham shruno prochyamanam asheshena pruthatvena dhananjaya.
Translation. The threefold division of intellect and firmness according to qualities, about to be taught fully and distinctively, by me, hear you, O Dhananjaya. Qualities, gunas, such as sattva. The first half of the verse contains in an aphoristic form what is going to be taught. Dhananjaya, the conqueror of wealth. Arjuna is so called because he acquired much wealth, human and divine, material and spiritual during his tour of conquest through the four quarters of the earth. Sattvic intellect.
प्रवृत्तिं च निवृत्तिं च कार्याकार्ये भयाभये बन्धं मोक्षं च या वेत्ति बुद्धिः सा पार्थ सात्विकी.
Translation. That which knows action and inaction, what ought to be done and what ought not to be done, fear and absence of fear, bondage and liberation, that intellect is sattvic, O Parth. Action, pravritti, the cause of bondage, the karmarga, the path of action as taught in the sastra. Inaction, nivritti, the cause of liberation, the path of sannyasa. As action, pravritti, and inaction, nivritti, occur in connection with bondage, bandha, and liberation, moksha, they have been interpreted to mean the paths of action and renunciation, karma and sannyasa. What done? The necessity for doing or not doing by one who relies on the sastra at particular places and times, actions producing visible or invisible results, according as they are enjoined or prohibited by the scriptural or social ethics. Fear etc., the cause of fear and the cause of fearlessness, either visible or invisible. Bondage and liberation, together with their causes. Knowledge is avriti or function or state of intellect, buddhi, whereas intellect is what functions or undergoes change of state. Even firmness, dhriti, is only a particular function or state of intellect. Rajasic intellect.
यया धर्ममधर्मं च कार्यं चाकार्यमेव च अयथावत् प्रजानाति बुद्धिः सा पार्थ राजसी.
Translation. That by which one wrongly understands dharma and adharma, and also what ought to be done and what ought not to be done, that intellect, O Parth, is rajasic. Dharma is what is ordained in the scriptures and adharma is what is prohibited in them. What done? The same that was mentioned already. 18.30. Wrongly, in opposition to what is determined by all authorities. This is to show how the knowledge, jnana, whose threefold nature has been described already, 18:20-22, is different from the intellect, buddhi, whose threefold nature is here described. Dharma and adharma here spoken of refer to the apurva, i.e., the forms which actions assume after their performance till their effects become perceptible, whereas karya and akarya refer to the performance or the non-performance of the acts. Hence no tautology.
अधर्मं धर्ममिति या मन्यते तमसा वृता सर्वार्थान् विपरीतांश्च बुद्धिः सा पार्थ तामसी.
Translation. That which, enveloped in darkness, sees adharma as dharma and all things perverted, that intellect, O Parth, is tamasic. It takes quite a perverted view of all things to be known. Sattvic firmness.
धृत्या यया धारयते मनः प्राणेन्द्रियक्रियाः योगेनाव्यभिचारिण्या धृतिः सा पार्थ सात्विकी.
Translation. The firmness which is ever accompanied by yoga, and by which the activities of thought, of life breaths and sense organs, O Parth, are held fast, such a firmness is sattvic. Yoga, samadhi or concentration of mind. Held fast, restrained from rushing into ways which are opposed to the sastra, it is only when they are restrained by firmness of the intellect that they do not rush into ways which are opposed to the sastra. The meaning of the passage is this: he who, by unflinching firmness, restrains the activities of thought, manas, of life breaths and sense organs, restrains them by yoga. Rajasic firmness.
यया तु धर्मकामार्थान् धृत्या धारयते अर्जुन प्रसङ्गेन फलाकाङ्क्षी धृतिः सा पार्थराजसी.
Translation. But the firmness with which one holds fast to dharma and pleasures and wealth, desirous of the fruit of each on its occasion, that firmness, O Parth, is rajasic. Dharma etc. When a person is firmly convinced at heart that dharma, pleasure and wealth ought always to be secured and is desirous of the fruit of each whenever that one, dharma or pleasure or wealth, occupies his attention, the firmness of such a person is rajasic. That is to say, one can restrain these activities by the firmness only which is every accompanied by samadhi, by concentration of mind in the Brahman. By mere firmness, which is not so accompanied by samadhi, one cannot invariably restrain them.
यया स्वप्नं भयं शोकं विषादं मदमेव च न विमुञ्चति दुर्मेधा धृतिः सा पार्थतामसी.
Translation. That with which a stupid man does not give up sleep, fear, grief, depression and lust, that firmness, O Parth, is tamasic. The stupid man holds sensual gratification in high esteem and never gives up lasciviousness. He regards sleep, etc., as things that ought always to be resorted to. Pleasure is threefold according to gunas. He threefold division of actions and of the several factors, karakas, concerned in action, has been described. Here follows the threefold division of pleasure which is the effect of actions.
सुखं त्विदानीं त्रिविधं शृणु मे भरतर्षभ अभ्यासाद्रमते यत्र दुःखान्तं च निगच्छति.
Translation. And now hear from me, O Lord of the Bharatas, of the threefold pleasure, in which one delights by practice and surely comes to the end of pain. Here, pay steady attention to practice, familiarity, frequency. The end, cessation or alleviation. Sattvic pleasure.
यत्तदग्रे विषमिव परिणामे मृतोपमम् तत्सुखं सात्विकं प्रोक्तमात्मबुद्धिप्रसादजम्.
Translation. That which is like poison at first, at the end, like nectar, that pleasure is declared to be sattvic, born of the purity of one's own mind. Like poison at first, on its first occurrence it is attended with pain as it is preceded by much trouble in the acquisition of jnana or spiritual knowledge, of vairagya or indifference to worldly objects, of dhyana and samadhi. At the end, the pleasure is like nectar, arising from mature knowledge and indifference to external objects. Declared, by the wise. Born, etc., born of the purity of one's own buddhi or antakarna, or born of the perfectly clear knowledge of the self. Being so born, the pleasure is sattvic. Rajasic pleasure.
विषयेन्द्रिय संयोगाद्यत्तदग्रे मृतोपमम् परिणामे विषमिव तत्सुखं राजसंस्मृतम्.
Translation. That pleasure which arises from the contract of the sense organ with the object, at first like nectar, in the end like poison, that is declared to be rajasic. In the end like poison, after indulgence. The sensual pleasure proves to be like poison, because it leads to deterioration in strength, vigor, color, wisdom, intellect, wealth and energy, and because it leads to adharma, and, as an effect thereof, to bel, narka. The second half of this verse is construed by other commentators, such as Sridhara and Madhusudana, with the next verse. Though the Bhashya does not make it clear how it should be construed, I have, following Anandagiri, made the whole verse appear to be a description of the threefold pleasure. Tamasic pleasure.
यदग्रे चानुबन्धे च सुखं मोहनमात्मनः निद्रालस्य प्रमादोत्थं तत्तामसमुदाहृतम्.
Translation. The pleasure which at first and in the sequel is delusive of the self, arising from sleep, indolence, and heedlessness, that pleasure is declared to be tamasic. In the sequel, after the termination. No man or God is free from gunas. Here follows the verse which concludes the present subject.
न तदस्ति पृथिव्यां वा दिवि देवेषु वा पुनः सत्त्वं प्रकृतिजैर्मुक्तं यदेभिः स्यात् त्रिभिर्गुणैः.
Translation. There is no being on earth, or again in heaven at Nong the Devas, that can be free from these three gunas born of Prakriti. Being, animate or inanimate. Gunas, such as Sattva. On earth, among men. The sequel sums up the whole doctrine. The whole samsara, manifested as action, instruments of action, and results, made up of the gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas, and set up by avidya, the evil of samsara has been thus described as well as its root. It has also been figuratively represented as a tree, in 15.1. It has also been said that after having cut the tree of samsara asunder with the strong sword of non-attachment, then that goal should be sought after. From this it may follow that, as everything is made up of the three gunas, a cessation of the cause of samsara cannot be brought about. Now, it is with a view to show how its cessation can be brought about, with a view, further, to sum up the whole teaching of the Gita Sastra, and with a view to show what the exact teaching of the Vedas and the Smritis is which should be followed by those who seek to attain the highest end of man, it is with this view that the next section, from 18.41 onward, is commenced. Duties of the four castes ordained according to nature.
ब्राह्मणक्षत्रियविषां शूद्राणां च परन्तप कर्माणि प्रविभक्तानि स्वभावप्रभवैर्गुणैः.
Translation. Of Brahmanas and Kshatriyas and Vaisyas, as also of Sudras, O Parantapa, the duties are divided according to the qualities born of nature. Sudras are separated from others who are all mentioned together in one compound word because Sudras are of one birth and are debarred from the study of the Vedas. Divided, the duties are allotted to each class, as distinguished from those pertaining to the other classes by what standard? According to the qualities, gunas, born of nature. Nature, svabhava, is the Isvara's Prakriti Maya made up of the three gunas. It is in accordance with the gunas of the Prakriti that duties such as serenity and the like are assigned to the Brahmanas, etc. respectively. Or to explain in another way, the source of the Brahmanas' nature, Svabhava, is the guna of Sattva, the source of the Kshatriya's nature is Rajas and Sattva, the latter being subordinate to the former. The source of the Vaisya's nature is Rajas and Tamas, the latter being subordinate to the former. The source of the Shudra's nature is Tamas and Rajas, the latter being subordinate to the former. For, as we see, the characteristic features of their nature are serenity, lordliness, activity, and dullness respectively. Or to interpret yet in another way, nature, svabhava, is the tendency, samskara, vasana, in living beings acquired by them in the past births, and manifesting itself in the present birth by way of being ready to yield its effects, and this nature is the source of the gunas, it being impossible for the gunas to manifest themselves without a cause. The assertion that nature, samskara, vasana, is the cause of the gunas means that it is a kind of specific cause. The duties, such as serenity, are assigned to the four classes in accordance with the gunas of sattva, rajas and tamas, which are brought into manifestation by their respective natural tendencies, and which lead to those duties as their natural effects. Objection: the duties of brahmanas, etc., are enjoined by the sastra and are assigned to them by the sastra. How then can it be said that they are divided according to sattva and other gunas? Answer: there is no room here for any such objection. By the sastra, too, are the duties such as serenity assigned to the brahmanas, etc., only in accordance with their respective gunas such as sattva, but not independently of them. Wherefore it is said that duties are assigned according to gunas, though it has also been said that they are assigned by the sastra. What then are those duties? The answer follows.
शमोदमस्तपः शौचं शान्तिरार्जवमेव च ज्ञानं विज्ञानमास्तिक्यं ब्रह्म कर्म स्वभावजम्.
Translation: serenity, self-restraint, austerity, purity, forgiveness, and also uprightness, knowledge, wisdom, faith, these are the duties of the brahmanas, born of nature. Serenity and self-restraint have already been explained, 16.1-2. Austerity, physical austerity, and so on, mentioned above, 17, 14, 15, 16. Purity, already explained. Faith, in the teaching of the scriptures. Born of nature, this means the same here as in the latter portion of 18.41.
शौर्यं तेजो धृतिर्दाक्ष्यं युद्धे चाप्यपलायनम् दानमीश्वरभावश्च क्षात्रं कर्म स्वभावजम्.
Translation: bravery, boldness, fortitude, promptness, not flying from battle, generosity and lordliness are the duties of the Kshatriyas, born of nature. Fortitude, that by which upheld one is not subject to depression, under any circumstances whatever. Promptness, the performing, without confusion, of duties which present themselves quite unexpectedly and demand ready action. Not flying from battle, not turning away from foes. Lordliness, exercise of ruling power over those who are to be ruled.
कृषिगौ रक्ष्य वाणिज्यं वैश्यकर्म स्वभावजम् परिचर्यात्मकं कर्म शूद्रस्यापि स्वभावजम्.
Translation: plowing, cattle rearing, and trade are the duties of the Vaisyas, born of nature. And of the nature of service is the duty of the Shudra, born of nature. Devotion to one's own duty leads to perfection. These duties, respectively enjoined on the several castes, led, when rightly performed, to Swarga as their natural result, as stated in the Smritis, such as the following: men of several castes and orders, each devoted to his respective duties, reap the fruits of their actions after death, and then by the residual karma, attain to births in superior countries, castes and families, possessed of comparatively superior dharma, span of life, learning, conduct, wealth, happiness and intelligence. Apastambadharmasutra 2.2.2.3. And in the Purana also are specified the different results and worlds which the several castes and orders attain. But, from the operation of a new cause the following result accrues.
स्वे स्वे कर्मण्यभिरतः संसिद्धिं लभते नरः स्वकर्मनिरतः सिद्धिं यथा विन्दति तच्छृणु.
Translation. Devoted each to his own duty, man attains perfection. How one, devoted to one's own duty, attains success, that do you hear. Each to his own duty, as ordained according to his nature. Man, he who is qualified for Karma Yoga. Perfection, Sansiddhi, which consists in the body and senses being qualified for the devotion of knowledge, Jnana-nishtha, after all their impurities have been washed away by the performance of one's own duty. Can this perfection be attained directly by the mere performance of one's own duty? No. How then? Learn how it can be attained. That is when the same duties are performed, not for the sake of their immediate results, but for the sake of moksha. The questioner understands perfection in the sense of absolute perfection, i.e., moksha. It is, of course, impossible to attain moksha by works alone.
यतः प्रवृत्तिर्भूतानां येन सर्वमिदं ततं स्वकर्मणा तमभ्यर्च्य सिद्धिं विन्दति मानवः.
Translation. Him from whom is the evolution of all beings, by whom all this is pervaded, by worshipping him with his proper duty, man attains perfection. Pravritti, in the text, may mean either evolution or activity, and it proceeds from the Isvara, the Antaryaman, the ruler within. Beings, living creatures. His proper duty, each according to his caste, as described above. Worshipping the Lord by performing his duty, man attains perfection, in so far only as he becomes qualified for the devotion of knowledge, Jnana-nishtha. Such being the cause, therefore,
श्रेयान् स्वधर्मो विगुणः परधर्मात् स्वनुष्ठितात् स्वभावनियतं कर्म कुर्वन्नाप्नोति किल्बिषम्.
Translation. Better is one's own duty, though destitute of merits, than the duty of another well performed. Doing the duty ordained according to nature one incurs no sin. Just as a poisonous substance does not injure the worm born in that substance, so, he who does the duty ordained according to his own nature incurs no sin. One ought to abandon one's own duty. It has been said that he who does the duty ordained according to his nature incurs no sin like a worm born in poison, that the duty of another brings on fear, and that he who does not know the self cannot indeed remain even for a moment without doing action. Wherefore,
सहजं कर्म कौन्तेय सदोषमपि न त्यजेत् सर्वारम्भा हि दोषेण धूमेनाग्निरिवावृताः.
Translation. The duty borne with oneself, O son of Kunti, though faulty, one ought not to abandon, for all undertakings are surrounded with evil, as fire with smoke. Born with oneself, born with the very birth of man. Faulty, as everything is composed of the three gunas. All undertakings, whatever the duties are, by context, one's own as well as others' duties, for the reason here assigned is that they are all made up of the three gunas. Though a man may perform another's duty, abandoning what is called his own duty, the duty borne with himself, he is not free from fault, and another's duty brings on fear. And since it is not possible for any man who does not know the self to give up action entirely, therefore he ought not to abandon action, karma. Is entire renunciation of action possible? Now, let us inquire, is it because of the impossibility of entire abandonment of action that no one ought to renounce one's own, nature-born, duty, or is it because some sin accrues from the abandoning of the duty borne with oneself? Question, now, of what good is this inquiry? Answer, in the first place, if the duty borne with oneself ought not to be abandoned, merely because of the impossibility of renouncing action entirely, then it would follow that there can be nothing but merit in renouncing it entirely. Therefore it is not right to do another's duty. The sin, pratyavaya, arising from the neglect of the duty enjoined in the Shruti as obligatory. The Sankhya, Buddhistic and Vaisheshika theories. Objection, yes, but an entire renunciation is not possible. Is the soul, Purusha, always mobile like the gunas of the Sankhyas? Or, is action itself the actor, soul, like the five skandhas of the Buddhists, undergoing destruction every moment? In either case, an entire renunciation of action is impossible. Now there is also a third theory: when the thing, soul, acts, then it is active, when it does not act, then it is actionless. Such being the case, it is possible to renounce action entirely. And there is this peculiarity in this theory: neither is the thing, soul, ever mobile, nor is action itself. The actor, the soul, but it is a permanent fixed substance, wherein action which was non-existent before arises, and wherein action which has been existent ceases. While the substance remains pure, actionless, with the potentiality of the activity in it, and as such forms the actor, thus say the followers of Kannada. What objection is there to this theory? Refutation of the Vaisheshika theory. Answer: there is certainly this objection, that it is contrary to the Lord's teaching. How do you know? For the Lord has said there can be no existence of the non-existent, 2.16, and so on. But according to the followers of Kannada, the non-existent comes into existence, and the existent becomes non-existent. Wherefore their theory is contrary to the Lord's teaching. Objection: how can it be objected to if it agrees with reason, though it may be opposed to the Lord's teaching? Answer: we reply, this view is certainly objectionable, because it is opposed to all evidence. How? If a dvyanuka, an aggregate of two atoms, or other substance is absolutely non-existent before its production, and if, remaining for a time after production, if again becomes non-existent, then it follows that what was non-existent becomes existent, and what is existent will become non-existent, that non-entity becomes an entity, and an entity becomes non-entity. In that case it must be that a non-entity, abhava, which is to become an entity, bhava, is like a rabbit's horn before becoming an entity, and that it becomes an entity by the action of the threefold cause, of the material, the non-material or accidental, and the efficient causes, samavaya smave nimitta-karanas. Now it is not possible to bold, in the present case, that a non-entity is born and needs a cause, for it does not apply to other non-entities, such as a rabbit's born if a pot or the like, which is to be produced, as an effect, be of the nature of an entity, then we can understand that when it is to be produced as an effect, it needs a cause so far merely as regards its manifestation. Moreover, if the non-existent should become existent and the existent should become non-existent, then nobody can be certain as to anything whatsoever in matters of evidence and things ascertainable by evidence, inasmuch as there can be no certainty that the existent will continue to be existent and the non-existent will continue to be non-existent. Moreover, when they, the followers of Kannada, say that a dvenuka or such other substance is produced as an effect, they speak of it as connected with its cause and as existent. Having been non-existent before production, it becomes, in virtue of the operation of its cause connected with that cause the ultimate atoms and with existence, by the relation known as samvaya, i.e., intimate or inseparable relation when, thus, related, i.e., when it is inseparably connected with the cause, it becomes existent. Here they may be asked to explain how the non-existent can have a cause of its own. We cannot indeed think of a thing which can cause the birth of a barren woman's son or his relation to anything else. Objection: the Vaiseshikas do not hold that the non-existent is related to anything. It is substances, such as dvanukas, that are said to be intimately related to their causes. Answer: no, because they are not supposed to exist prior to this relation. The Vaiseshikas do not argue that a pot or the like exists prior to the action of the potter's stick and wheel. Neither do they hold that clay assumes by itself the form of a pot. Wherefore, as the only other alternative, they have to admit that the non-existent pot becomes related to the cause. Objection: it is not opposed to reason to hold that, though non-existent, it may be related by samvaya or intimate relation to the cause. Answer: no, for no such thing can be admitted in the case of a barren woman's son. If we are to hold that the antecedent non-existence, prabhava, of a pot or the like becomes related to the cause, but not the barren woman's son, notwithstanding that both are alike non-entities, abhava, it is necessary to show how one non-entity can be distinguished from the other. Non-existence of one, non-existence of two. Non-existence of all, antecedent non-existence, prabhava, non-existence after destruction. Pravamsabhava, mutual non-existence, anyonyabhava, absolute non-existence, atyantabhava. Nobody can point out any definite distinction among these in themselves. In the absence of a distinction, it is unreasonable to bold that only the antecedent non-existence of a pot becomes a pot through the action of a potter, etc., that it becomes related to a cause of its own, the potsherds which are existent, that when thus related it can very well be spoken of as being produced and so on, but that such is not the case with regard to the non-existence after destruction, pravamsabhava, of the same pot, though both alike are non-existent. It is unreasonable to hold that other non-existences, abhavas, such as non-existence after destruction, can never become an existent effect, and so on, whereas antecedent non-existence alone, such as that of Dvyanuka and the like substances, can become an existent effect, and so on, though it is an abhava or non-existent quite as much as non-existence after destruction or absolute non-existence. Objection: we do not hold that the non-existent becomes the existent. Answer: then the existent becomes existent. For instance, a pot becomes a pot, a cloth becomes a cloth. This, too, is opposed to all evidence, like the theory that non-existent becomes existent. Refutation of the Parinamavada. As to the Parinama, transformation, theory of the Sasankhya's, even that theory does not differ from the theory of the Vaiseshikas, inasmuch as it postulates the production of properties non-existent before, as well as their destruction. Even admitting their explanation that by manifestation or disappearance, an effect is said to come into existence or undergo destruction, the theory is all the same opposed to evidence, as may be found if we enquire whether the manifestation and disappearance are previously existent or non-existent. For the same reason, we have to condemn that theory also which says that production etc. of an effect are only different states of the cause itself. The Lord's theory of illusion. As the only other alternative, there remains this theory, that the one existence, the sole reality, is by avidya, imagined variously, as so many things undergoing production, destruction and the like changes, like an actor on the stage. This doctrine of the Lord has been stated in 2.16, the consciousness of the existent, sat, being constant and the consciousness of all the rest being inconstant. The enlightened alone can renounce action entirely. Objection: then, the self being immutable, where is the impossibility of renouncing all action entirely? Answer: action is the property or attribute of the gunas, be they regarded as real things, or as things set up by avidya. It is ascribed to the self through avidya, and it has therefore been said that no ignorant man, avidvan, can renounce action entirely even for a moment. 3.5. On the other hand, he who knows the self is able to renounce action entirely, inasmuch as avidya has been expelled by vidya or wisdom, for there can be no residue left of what is ascribed by avidya. Indeed, no residue is left of the second moon created by the false vision of the Timira-affected eye, even after the removal of Timira. Such being the case, the statements contained in 5.13, 18.45, 46 are quite reasonable. Perfection in Karma Yoga leads to absolute perfection. It has been said that the perfection reached by means of Karma Yoga consists in becoming qualified for Jnana-nishtha, the path of wisdom, and it is with a view to describe, as the fruit thereof, the Nashkamaya Siddhi perfection in the form of absolute freedom from action, known as Jnana-nishtha, that the Lord now proceeds to teach us follows point.
असक्त बुद्धिः सर्वत्र जितात्मा विगतस्पृहः नैष्कर्म्य सिद्धिं परमां संन्यासेनाधिगच्छति.
Translation: he whose reason is not attached anywhere, whose self is subdued, from whom desire has fled, he by renunciation attains the supreme state of freedom from action. He whose reason, buddhi, antahkarana, is free from attachment to sons, wife and other objects of attachment, whose self, antahkarana, is brought under his own control, from whom desire for the body, for life, and for pleasures has fled. A person of this sort who knows the self attains to the supreme perfection, to absolute freedom from action, Natkamaya Siddhi, by Samanyasa. In virtue of his knowledge of the unity of the actionless Nishkriya, Brahman and the self, all actions have fled from him. This is known as the state of absolute freedom from action, and it is a siddhi or perfection. Nashkamaya Siddhi may also mean the attainment, siddhi, of Nashkamya, the state in which one remains as the actionless self. It is supreme as distinguished from the perfection attainable by Karma Yoga. It is the state of immediate liberation, Sadyamukti. This state is attained by samanyasa or right knowledge, or better still, by the renunciation of all actions for which one is prepared by his right knowledge, and so says the Lord in 5.13. Now, the Lord proceeds to teach how a man who, having attained perfection, as described above in 18.46, by performing his duty, as taught above, in the service of the Lord, has come by the discriminative knowledge of the self, can attain the perfection known as Nashkamya or absolute freedom from action, i.e., a firm unswerving stand in the knowledge of the pure self.
सिद्धिं प्राप्तो यथा ब्रह्म तथाप्नोति निबोध मे समासेनैव कौन्तेय निष्ठा ज्ञानस्य या परा.
Translation. How he who has attained perfection reaches Brahman, that in brief do you learn from me, O son of Kunti, that supreme consummation of knowledge. The perfection he has already attained consists in the body and the senses being prepared for devotion to knowledge as a result of the grace of the Lord worshipped through his duty. Reference to this, perfection, serves as a prelude to what follows. What is that perfection to which that reference forms a prelude? It is the process of jnana-nishtha, or devotion to knowledge, by which he attains Brahman, the Supreme Self. That process, the way to the attainment of jnana-nishtha, do you understand with certainty from my speech? Is it to be described at length? No, says the Lord, it will be described only in brief. Absolute perfection is the consummation of self-knowledge. What the attainment of Brahman referred to in the words, how he reaches Brahman, is, the Lord proceeds to specify in the words, that supreme consummation of knowledge, consummation, nishtha, means perfection, the final or highest stage. Question: consummation of what? Answer: of Brahmajnana or knowledge of Brahman. Question: of what nature is the consummation of Brahmajnana? Answer: of the same nature as Atmajnana, or self-knowledge. Question: of what nature is the self-knowledge? Answer: of the same nature as the self. Question: of what nature is the self? Answer: of the nature described by the Lord and in the passages of the Upanishads, and ascertainable, by nyaya or reasoning, upon the scriptural texts. The following discussion in the form of questions and answers is intended to show that the consummation of knowledge is a well-defined end as spoken of here. It is the consummation of Brahmajnana, knowledge of Brahman. Brahmajnana is not different from self-knowledge, and the nature of the self is defined here in 2.20 and in the Upanishads, and it can also be ascertained by reasoning upon scriptural texts, which describe him as devoid of attachment and immutable. Is self-knowledge possible at all? Objection: knowledge of cognition, jhana, is of the form of its object. but it is nowhere admitted that the self is an object of cognition or has a form. Answer: the self has a form, as taught in the scriptural passages, in color like the sun, luminous in form, self-luminous. Objection: no, those passages are intended to remove the idea that the self is of the nature of darkness, tamas. When the self is said to be neither of the form of a substance nor of an attribute, it would follow that the self is of the nature of darkness, and the preventing of this idea is the aim of the descriptions such as, in color like the sun. Form is specifically denied, the self being described as formless. Point: neither is the self an object of cognition, as taught in passages like the following: his form stands not in our ken, nor can anyone see him with the eye, without sound and touch. Wherefore it is wrong to speak of a cognition of the form of the self. Such being the case, how can there be a cognition of the self? Indeed, all cognition, whatever be its object, is of the form of that object. And it has been said that the self is formless. If both the self and the cognition thereof be formless, how is the constant meditation of self-knowledge or the consummation thereof to be attained? The self reveals himself in pure reason. Answer: do not think so, for it can be shown that the self is extremely pure, extremely clear, and extremely subtle. And buddhi, reason, being as pure, etc., as the self, it can put on the semblance of that aspect of the self which is manifested as consciousness. Manas puts on a semblance of buddhi, the sense organs put on a semblance of manas, and the physical body again puts on a semblance of the sense organ. Wherefore common people look upon the mere physical body as the self. And the Lokaitikas, materialists, who argue that consciousness is a property of the physical body, declare that the Purusha or soul is identical with the physical body endued with consciousness. Similarly, others again argue that consciousness is a property of the senses, others again argue that consciousness is a property of buddhi. There are a few who hold that there is something within even beyond the buddhi, the avyakta, the unmanifested, also called the avyakrita, the undifferentiated, in the form of avidya, and they say that the avyakrita is the self. Everywhere, from buddhi down to the physical body, the cause of illusory identification of each with the self is its wearing a semblance of the consciousness of the self, and it is therefore unnecessary to impart directly a knowledge of the self. What then is necessary? What is necessary is the mere elimination of the not-self associated with the self names, forms and the like, but it is unnecessary to try and teach what the consciousness of the self is like, inasmuch as it is invariably comprehended in association with all objects of perception which are set up by avidya. Accordingly, the Vijnanavadins, the Buddhistic idealists, hold that there is nothing real except ideas, and that these ideas require no external evidence to prove their existence, inasmuch as it is admitted that they are self-cognized. Therefore we have only to eliminate what is falsely ascribed to Brahman by avidya. We have to make no more effort to acquire a knowledge of Brahman, as he is quite self-evident. Though thus quite self-evident, easily knowable, quite near, and forming the very self, Brahman appears to the unenlightened, to those whose reason, buddhi, is carried away by the differentiate phenomena of names and forms created by avidya as unknown, difficult to know, very remote, as though he were a separate thing. But to those whose reason, buddhi, has turned away from external phenomena, who have secured the grace of the Guru and attained the serenity of the self, Manas, there is nothing else so blissful, so well known, so easily knowable, and quite so near as Brahman. Accordingly, the knowledge of Brahman is said to be immediately comprehended and unopposed to Dharma. 9.2. Some conceited philosophers hold that reason, buddhi, cannot grasp the self, as he is formless, and that therefore the devotion of right knowledge is impossible of attainment. True, it is unattainable to those who have not been properly initiated into the traditional knowledge by the Gurus. The great ones, who have not learned and studied the teachings of the Vedanta, whose intellect is quite engrossed in the external objects of senses, and who have not been trained in the right sources of knowledge. But, for those who are differently situated, i.e., who have been duly initiated etc., it is quite impossible to believe in the reality of the dual, the perceiver and the perceived, of our external perception, because they perceive no reality other than the consciousness of the self. And we have shewn in the preceding sections that this not the reverse is the truth, and the Lord also has declared the same in 2.69. Wherefore it is only a cessation of the perception of the differentiated forms of the external world that can lead to a firm grasp of the real nature of the self. For, the self is not a thing unknown to anybody at any time, is not a thing to be reached or got rid of or acquired. If the self be quite unknown, all undertakings intended for the benefit of oneself would have no meaning. It is not, indeed, possible to imagine that they are for the benefit of the physical body or the like which has no consciousness, nor is it possible to imagine that pleasure is for pleasure's sake and pain is for pain's sake. It is, moreover, the self-knowledge which is the aim of all endeavor. Wherefore, just as there is no need for an external evidence by which to know one's own body, so there is no need for an external evidence by which to know the self who is even nearer than the body. Thus it is clear that, to those who can discriminate, the Atma-Jnana-nishtha, devotion to self-knowledge, is easy of attainment. Cognition and the cognizer are self-revealed. Those also who had that cognition, jnana, is formless and is not known by immediate perception must admit that, since an object of knowledge is apprehended through cognition, cognition is quite as immediately known as pleasure or the like. Moreover, it cannot be maintained that cognition is a thing which one seeks to know. If cognition were unknown, it would be a thing which has to be sought after just as an object of cognition is sought after. Just as, for example, a man seeks to reach by cognition the cognizable object such as a pot, so also would he have to seek to reach cognition by means of another cognition. But the fact is otherwise. Wherefore cognition is self-revealed, and therefore, also, is the cognizer self-revealed. Therefore it is not for the knowledge of Brahman or the self that any effort is needed, it is needed only to prevent us from regarding the not-self as the self. Therefore, devotion to knowledge, jnana-nishtha, is easily attainable. The path to absolute perfection. How is this consummation of knowledge to be attained? Listen.
बुद्ध्या विशुद्धया युक्तो धृत्यात्मानं नियम्य च शब्दादीन् विषयान् त्यक्त्वा रागद्वेषौ व्युतस्य च.
Translation. Endued with a pure reason, controlling the self with firmness, abandoning sound and other objects, and laying aside love and hatred. Pure, free from illusion, maya, from doubt and misconception. Reason, Buddhi, the determining faculty. The self, the aggregate of the body and the senses. Abandoning etc., as we should understand from the context, all superfluous luxuries, all objects except those only which are necessary for the bare maintenance of the body, and laying aside love and hatred even for those objects which appear necessary for the maintenance of the body. Then, with a view to bring into existence something that does not already exist by means of an act enjoined in the Shruti. A continuous current of the knowledge of Brahman, the reason merging in Brahman through the elimination of all alien attributes ascribed to him.
विविक्तसेवी लघ्वाशी यतवाकाय मानसः ध्यानयोगपरो नित्यं वैराग्यं समुपाश्रितः.
Translation. Resorting to a sequestered spot, eating but little, speech and body and mind subdued, always engaged in meditation and concentration, endued with dispassion, resorting, etc., ever accustomed to resort to such sequestered spots as a jungle, the sandbank of a river, the mountain cave. Eating but little, as conducive to the serenity of thought by keeping off sleep and such other evils. This devotee of wisdom should also restrain his speech, body and mind. With all the senses thus quieted, he should always and devoutly practice dhyana or mediation upon the nature of the self, and yoga or concentration of the mind on the self. Always, this implies that he has to do nothing else, no mantrajpa, repetition of chants or mystic formulae, etc. Dispassion, absence of desire for visible and invisible objects. This should be a constant attitude of the mind. Moreover,
अहङ्कारं बलं दर्पं कामं क्रोधं परिग्रहम् विमुच्य निर्ममः शान्तो ब्रह्मभूयाय कल्पते.
Translation. Having abandoned egotism, strength, arrogance, desire, enmity, property, free from the notion of mine and peaceful, he is fit for becoming Brahman. Egotism, identifying the self with the body, etc. Strength, that strength which is combined with passion and desire, but not the physical or any other strength, the latter. Being natural, its abandonment is not possible. Arrogance, which follows the state of exaltation and leads to the transgression of dharma, as said in the Smriti. When a man exalts, he becomes arrogant, and when he becomes arrogant, he transgresses dharma. Property. Though a man is free from all passions of the mind and the senses, he may own so much of external belongings as is necessary for bodily sustenance and for the observance of his duties, dharma, but even this the aspirant abandons, i.e., he becomes a Paramahamsa Parivrajka, a Samanyasin of the fourth or highest order. He does not regard even the bodily life as his. Peaceful, free from exaltation and care. Such a devotee of wisdom is fit to become Brahman. The consummation of knowledge attained by devotion. In this way,
ब्रह्मभूतः प्रसन्नात्मा न शोचति न काङ्क्षति समः सर्वेषु भूतेषु मद्भक्तिं लभते पराम्.
Translation. Becoming Brahman, of serene self, be neither grieves nor desires, treating all beings alike, he attains supreme devotion to me. How who has reached Brahman and attained self-serenity does not grieve regarding his failure to accomplish an object or regarding his wants. It is not indeed possible to suppose that he who knows Brahman can have a longing for any object unattained, Therefore the words, "He neither grieves nor desires," is tantamount to saying that such is the nature of the man who has become Brahman. Another reading makes the passage mean, "He neither grieves nor exults, treating all beings alike. He regards the pleasure and pain of all creatures equally with his own, that they would affect them just as they affect himself." It is not meant here that he sees the identity of the self in all, as this will be mentioned in the next verse. Such a devotee to wisdom attains highest devotion to me, the Supreme Lord, the fourth or the highest of the four kinds of devotion, the devotion of knowledge, spoken of in 7.16. Then,
भक्त्या मामभिजानाति यावान्यश्चास्मि तत्त्वतः ततो मां तत्त्वतो ज्ञात्वा विशते तदनन्तरम्.
Translation. By devotion he knows me in truth, what and who I am. Then, knowing me in truth, he forthwith enters into me. By bhakti, by the devotion of knowledge, he knows me as I am in the diverse manifestations caused by upadhis. He knows who I am. He knows that I am devoid of all the differences caused by the upadhis, that I am the Supreme Purusha, that I am like unto Akasha. He knows me to be non-dual, the one consciousness, Chaitanya, pure and simple, unborn, undecaying, undying, fearless, deathless. The knowing me in truth, he enters into myself immediately after attaining knowledge. It is not meant here that the act of knowledge and the act of entering are two distinct acts. What then is the act of entering? It is the knowledge itself, for there is nothing to be effected by knowledge other than itself, as the Lord has taught. Do you also know me as Kshetragna? 13.2. Objection. The statement that, by the supreme devotion of knowledge he knows me, involves a contradiction. How? Thus, when the knowledge of a certain object arises in the knower, then and then alone the knower knows that object, no devotion to that knowledge, no repetition of the knowledge is necessary. Therefore, the statement that he knows me, not by knowledge, but by devotion to knowledge, by a repetition of knowledge, involves a contradiction. Answer. This objection does not apply here, for the word devotion, nishtha, means that the knowledge aided by all the favorable conditions of its rise and development and freed from obstacles culminates in a firm conviction by one's own experience. When the knowledge of the unity of the individual self, Kshetragna, and the Supreme Self, Paramatman, generated by the teachings of the scriptures and the master under conditions favorable to the rise and ripening of that knowledge, purity of mind, humility and other attributes, and accompanied with the renunciation of all works which are associated with the idea of distinctions such as the agent and other factors of action, culminates in a firm conviction by one's own experience, then the knowledge is said to have attained supreme consummation. This Janana-nishtha, devotion of knowledge, is referred to as the supreme or fourth kind of devotion, bhakti, 7.17, supreme as compared with the remaining three kinds of devotion, with that of the distressed, etc., 7.16. By this supreme devotion the aspirant knows the Lord as he is, and immediately afterwards all consciousness of difference between the Ishvara and the Kshetragna disappears altogether. Thus there is no contradiction involved in the statement that, by the devotion of knowledge, the aspirant knows me. Renunciation of all works is necessary for absolute perfection. then alone can the well-ascertained teaching of all scriptures, viz., the Upanishads, Itihasas, Puranas and Smritis enjoining retirement, have a meaning. The scriptural texts are such as the following. Knowing it, they renounce and lead a mendicant life. Point. Wherefore they say that renunciation is excellent among these austerities. Point. Renunciation excels. Samanyasa is the renunciation of actions. Having abandoned Vedas, this world and the next, etc. Renounce dharma and adharma. And so on. Here, in the Gita also, passages of similar import, such as 5.12, occur. It cannot be held that these passages are meaningless. Nor can it be held that they are arthvadas. Mere explanatory or incidental remarks, not meant as obligatory injunctions, for they occur in the sections which specially treat of renunciation. Moreover, renunciation of works is necessary, because moksha consists in the realization of the immutability of one's own inner self. He who wishes to reach the eastern sea should not indeed travel in the opposite direction, i.e., by the same road that the man who wishes to go to the western sea chooses. And the devotion of knowledge, jnananishtha, consists in an intent effort to establish a continuous current of the idea of the inner self, pratyagatman, and there would be a conflict if that devotion were to be conjoined with ritual, karma, which is like going towards the western sea. It is a firm conviction of philosophers that the difference between the two is as wide as that between a mountain and a mustard seed. Hence the conclusion that the devotion of knowledge, jnananishtha, should be practiced by renouncing all action. Devotion to the Lord by works enjoined. The perfection accruing as the fruit of that bhakti yoga, which consists in worshipping the Lord through one's own duties, qualifies the aspirant for the devotion of knowledge which culminates in moksha. This bhakti yoga, the yoga of devotion to the Lord, is extolled here, in this section which sums up the teaching of the Sastra, with a view to firmly impress that teaching.
सर्वकर्माण्यपि सदा कुर्वाणो मद्व्यपाश्रयः मत्प्रसादादवाप्नोति शाश्वतं पदमव्ययम्.
Translation. Doing continually all actions whatsoever, taking refuge in me, by my grace he reaches the eternal undecaying abode. Doing all actions including even the prohibited actions, whoso seeks refuge in me, Vasudeva, the Lord, with his whole self centered in me, reaches the eternal abode of Vishnu by the grace of the Lord. Wherefore,
चेतसा सर्वकर्माणि मयि सन्न्यस्य मत्परः बुद्धियोगमुपाश्रित्य मच्चित्तः सततं भव.
Translation. Mentally resigning all deeds to me, regarding me as the Supreme, resorting to mental concentration, do you ever fix your heart in me? Mentally, with discriminative faith. All actions, producing visible and invisible results. Me, the Lord. As taught in 9.27, do you dedicate all your actions to me? Regarding me, Vasudeva, as the highest goal, his whole self centered in me. Regarding, and see, resorting to the Buddhiyoga, Samahita Buddhitva, steady-mindedness, firm faith as your sole refuge. I doughty the faith that knowledge alone obtainable by the Lord's grace, but not works, finally leads to salvation.
मच्चित्तः सर्वदुर्गाणि मत्प्रसादात् तरिष्यसि अथ चेत्त्वमहङ्कारान् न श्रोष्यसि विनङ्क्ष्यसि.
Translation. Fixing your heart in me, you shalt, by my grace, cross over all difficulties, but if from egotism you will not hear me, you shalt perish. Difficulties, the impassable obstacles arising from avidya, the cause of samsara. Egotism, the idea that you art a learned man. If you wilt not abide by my advice, then you shalt be ruined. Neither shouldst you think, I am independent, why should I obey the dictates of another?
यदहङ्कारमाश्रित्य न योत्स्य इति मन्यसे मिथ्यैष व्यवसायस्ते प्रकृतिस्त्वां नियोक्ष्यति.
Translation. If, indulging egotism, you thinkest, I will not fight, vain is this, your resolve, nature will constrain you, thinkest, resolvest. Vain, for, your nature as a kshatriya will constrain you to do so. Also because
स्वभावजेन कौन्तेय निबद्धः स्वेन कर्मणा कर्तुं नेच्छसि यन्मोहात् करिष्यस्य वशोऽपि तत्.
Translation. Bound, as you art, O son of Kunti, by your own nature-born act, that which from delusion you likest not to do, you shalt do, though against your will. Nature-born, such as prowess, and see, mentioned above, 18.43. Against your will, in subjection to some external force. 4.
ईश्वरः सर्वभूतानां हृद्देशेऽर्जुन तिष्ठति भ्रामयन् सर्वभूतानि यन्त्रारूढानि मायया.
Translation. The Lord dwells in the hearts of all beings. O Arjuna, whirling by Maya all beings, as if mounted on a machine. The Lord, Elisvara the ruler, Narayana. Arjuna pure in the internal self, of a pure antahkarana. The word Arjuna is used in the sense of pure in the Rigveda. The dark day and the light day. He causes all beings to revolve as if, being understood mounted on machines, like wooded dolls mounted on a machine. By Maya, by causing illusion. Whirling, should be construed with dwells.
तमेव शरणं गच्छ सर्वभावेन भारत तत्प्रसादात् परां शान्तिं स्थानं प्राप्स्यसि शाश्वतम्.
Translation. Fly unto him for refuge with all your being, O Bharata, by his grace shalt you obtain supreme peace, and the eternal resting place. Seek you that Lord as thy sole refuge with your whole being for relief from the distress of samsara. Then by his grace, you shalt obtain supreme peace and attain to my eye, Vishnu's supreme eternal abode.
इति ते ज्ञानमाख्यातं गुह्यात् गुह्यतरं मया विमृशैतदशेषेण यथेच्छसि तथा कुरु.
Translation. Thus has wisdom, more secret than all that is secret, been declared to you by me. Reflect you over it all and act as you pleasest. Me, the omniscient Lord. It, the Sastra, the teaching declared above, all, everything that has been taught. Devotion to the Lord is the secret of success in Karma Yoga. Listen to what I am again going to say.
सर्वगुह्यतमं भूयः शृणु मे परमं वचः इष्टोऽसि मे दृढमिति ततो वक्ष्यामि ते हितम्.
Translation. Hear you again my word supreme, the most secret of all, because you art my firm friend, Therefore will I tell you what is good. Again, though it has been more than once declared, I do not tell you either from fear or from hope of reward. You art my firm friend, you art ever beloved of me, and for this reason I shall tell you of the supreme good, the means of attaining knowledge. This last is, indeed, the highest of all kinds of good. What is it? The Lord says,
Manmana bhava madbhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru Mame vaishyasi satyam te pratijane priyosi me.
Translation. Fix your thought on me, be devoted to me, worship me, do homage to me. You shall reach myself. The truth do I declare to you, for you are dear to me. You shall reach myself, thus acting, i.e., looking up to Vasudeva alone as your aim, means, and end. You shalt come to me. In this matter I make a solemn promise. The meaning of the verse is this. Thus, knowing that the Lord's declarations are true, and being convinced that moksha is a necessary result of devotion to the Lord, one should look to the Lord as the highest and sole refuge. Right knowledge and renunciation. Having thought in conclusion that the supreme secret of the devotion of Karma Yoga is the regarding of the Lord as the sole refuge, the Lord now proceeds to speak of the right knowledge, the fruit of the devotion of Karma Yoga, as taught in the essential portions of all the Vedantas, Upanishads.
Sarvadharman parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja Aham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshayishyami ma shuchah.
Translation. Abandoning all righteous deeds, seek me as your sole refuge. I will liberate you from all sins. Do you not grieve? Righteous deeds, dharma, including unrighteous deeds, adharma, also, since nashkarmya or freedom from all action is intended to be taught here. Here may be cited such passages of the Shruti and the Smriti as the following. Not he who has not abstained from evil deed can attain it. Abandon dharma and adharma. So, the passage means renouncing all works. Me alone, the Ishvara, the self of all, dwelling the same in all. Seek me as your sole refuge. In the belief, I myself am that Ishvara, do you understand that there is naught else except me? When you art firm in this faith, I shall liberate you from all sins, from all bonds of dharma and adharana, by manifesting myself as your own self. So it has been already said here. I destroy the darkness born of ignorance by the luminous lamp of wisdom, abiding in their self. 10.2. Wherefore do you not grieve? What is the means to the highest bliss, knowledge or works? What has been determined in the Gita Sastra as the means of attaining the highest bliss, nishreyasa? Is it knowledge, jnana, or works, karma, or both together? Point. Whence this doubt? It has been said, knowing which one attains the immortal. 13.12, and then knowing me in truth, he forthwith enters into me. 13.55. These and other passages teach that the highest bliss is attained by mere knowledge. Such passages again as, your concern is with action alone, 2. 47, and do you also perform action, 4.15, teach that performance of works is quite obligatory. Since it has been taught that both knowledge and works are obligatory, there may arise a doubt as to whether also the two conjoined may not constitute the means to the highest bliss. What is the good of this enquiry at all? It is this to determine which one of them forms the means to the highest bliss. Wherefore, the subject is very wide and is worth investigating. Self-knowledge alone is the means to the highest bliss. Pure self-knowledge alone is the means to the highest bliss, for as removing the notion of variety, it culminates in liberation. Kaivalya, avidya is the perception of variety involving actions, factors of action, and the ends of actions. It is always present in the self. Mine is action, I am the agent, I do this act for such and such a result. In this form, avidya has been active in time without a beginning. The remover of this avidya is the knowledge of the self arising in the following form. Here I am, free, a non-agent, actionless, devoid of results, for such a knowledge removes the notion of variety which causes one to engage in action. The word alone, in the opening line of this paragraph, is intended to exclude the two other alternatives, neither by works alone, nor by works and knowledge conjoined together, is the highest bliss attained. Since, moreover, the highest bliss is not an effect to be accomplished by action, works cannot be the means to it. Indeed, the eternal reality is not produced either by knowledge or by works. Objection, then, even the pure knowledge serves no purpose. Answer, not so, for, by removing avidya, it culminates in emancipation, which is a visible result. We know from experience that knowledge which removes the darkness of avidya culminates in emancipation as its result. For instance, in the case of a rope, mistaken for a serpent, as soon as the light of the lamp removes the darkness which caused the error, the rope is no longer mistaken for a serpent. The result of illumination culminates indeed in the emancipation of the rope, in freeing the rope from the various mistaken notions of serpent, etc., which then cease altogether. So, too, as regards the self-knowledge. Knowledge cannot be conjoined with works. Now when the agent and other factors of action are operating in the act of cutting or in the act of churning fire, each act producing a visible result, they cannot, at the same time, operate in other act productive of another result different from severance or the kindling of a fire. So also when the agent and other factors of action are concerned in the act of knowledge devotion, jnananishtha, whereof alike the result is visible, they cannot at the same time operate to bring about another act productive of a result other than the emancipation of the self. Wherefore, the devotion of knowledge cannot be conjoined with works. Objection, they may be conjoined, just as the act of eating and the acts of fire worship, agnihotra, etc., are conjoined. Answer no, for, emancipation being the result of knowledge, the devotee of knowledge cannot desire the result of works. When there is an all-spreading flood of water close by, nobody would ever think of constructing wells and tanks to any purpose. So also when knowledge leading to emancipation as its result has been attained, nobody would ever desire any other result or seek to do an act by which to obtain that other result. He who is engaged in an act by which he hopes to acquire a whole kingdom will not certainly engage in an act which can at best secure for him a piece of land, nor will he cherish a desire for it. Therefore works are not the means to the highest bliss. Neither is a conjunction of knowledge and works possible. Nor can it be held that knowledge which leads to emancipation requires the aid of works, for as removing avidya, knowledge is opposed to works. Indeed, darkness cannot remove darkness. Therefore, knowledge alone is the means to the highest bliss. Refutation of the theory that salvation is attained by works alone. Objection: no. For, by neglect of nitya or obligatory works one incurs sin, pratyavaya, and kaivalya or emancipation is eternal. To explain, it is wrong to say that emancipation is attained by knowledge alone, for by neglect of the nitya karma or obligatory works enjoined in the Shruti, a man incurs sin which leads him to hell, etc. Counter-objection: thus, then, since moksha is not to be attained by works, there can be no hope of attaining moksha at all. Rejoinder: there is no room for any such objection, inasmuch as moksha is eternal. The sin of omission, pratyavaya, is avoided by the observance of the nitya karma or obligatory works, by avoiding the prohibited acts. No obnoxious bodies are generated, by avoiding the kamya karma or interested acts no desirable body either generated, and when the present body perishes on the exhaustion of the fruits of the works which have given rise to the body, no more causes then exist which can generate another body, and when attachment and other passions are expunged from the heart, the emancipation of the self, i.e., the realization by the self of his own true nature, is attained without any effort. Counter-objection: those of the acts done in the past innumerable births, which have not yet begun their effects, and of which some lead to heaven and others to hell, and so on, have not been extinguished, because their effects have not been enjoyed. Rejoinder: no, for we argue that the fruits of those works are reaped in the form of the trouble and pain involved in the performance of the nitya karma. Or the nitya karma may, like the prayashchitta or expiatory act, serve to destroy past sins. The works which have begun their effects being exhausted by the enjoyment of their fruits, and no new works being undertaken, it follows that emancipation is attained without any effort. Answer: no, for the Shruti says that there exists no other road to moksha than knowledge. Knowing him alone, one crosses beyond death. There exists no other road to the abode. Shruti says, further, that moksha is as impossible for the unwise man as it is impossible for men to compress the akash like leather. And the Puranic tradition also says that one attains emancipation by knowledge. Moreover, the good deeds, punya karma, which have not yet begun their effects cannot be said to have been exhausted. Just as the existence of sins which have not begun their effects is possible, so also the existence of good, punya, deeds which have not yet begun their effects is possible, and as these cannot be exhausted without generating another body, moksha is not possible. Neither is it possible to generate no new merit and demerit, dharma and adharma in this body, inasmuch as destruction of love and hatred and delusion which lead to acts of merit and demerit cannot be effected except by means of self-knowledge. Because the Shruti says that the nitya karma produces merit, punya, as its result, and because the Smriti says that, by performing their proper duties, the several castes and orders attain to a high immeasurable happiness, the exhaustion of works is not possible. Refutation of the theory that the nitya karma leads to no future births. Now, as to the contention, as painful in itself, the nitya karma is itself the fruit of sinful deeds committed in the past. Apart from itself, the nitya karma bears no distinct fruit, because the Shruti speaks nowhere of its fruits, the mere circumstance of a man being alive forming a sufficient ground for its necessary performance. We say, no, for, it is impossible for those deeds to yield their fruits which have not yet begun to work out their effects. Neither can there be any variety in the pain involved in the performance of the nityakarma. To explain, it is wrong to say that the fruits of sinful deeds committed in the past births are reaped in the form of the trouble and pain involved in the performance of the nityakarma. We cannot indeed understand how the fruit of the deeds which did not sprout up for fruition at the time of death can be reaped in the birth caused by another set of deeds. Otherwise, there would be nothing unreasonable in the supposition that infernal suffering is possible in the very birth that has been generated by Agnihotra, fire sacrifice, for the enjoyment of the fruit thereof, i.e., for the enjoyment of heaven, Swarga. Moreover, the pain involved in the performance of the nitya karma cannot answer to that variety of suffering, which should result from the variety of acts of sin. While many acts of sin productive of as many distinct kinds of suffering may possibly exist, to suppose that their effects consist in the mere trouble and pain involved in the observance of the nitya karma would lead to the further supposition which it is impossible to hold that the suffering inflicted by the pairs of opposites, diseases and the like, has no cause of its own, and that the trouble and pain involved in the observance of the nitya karma is alone the effect of past sins, but not the pain of carrying stones on the head or the like. Besides, it is irrelevant to say that the trouble and pain involved in the observance of the nitya karma constitutes the result of the sinful deeds done in the past. How? It has been urged that no extinction of the past sin which has not begun to bear fruit is possible, whereas you say that the fruit of the deed which has begun to bear fruit, not the fruit of the deed which has not begun to bear fruit, is reaped in the form of the trouble and pain involved in the observance of the nitya karma. If, on the other hand, you mean that the whole sin committed in the past has begun to bear fruit, then there is no ground for the specification that the mere trouble and pain involved in the observance of the nitya karma are the fruits of those sinful deeds which have not begun to produce their effects. It would then also follow that the enjoining of the nitya karma has no purpose to serve, for the sinful deeds which have begun their effects can be extinguished by merely undergoing the effects so produced. Moreover, if pain be the result of the nitya karmas enjoined in the Shruti, that pain may arise from the trouble involved in the observance of the nitya karma itself as from any other active exercise, it is therefore unreasonable to suppose that it is the result of another action. Again, as enjoined on a man on the mere ground of his being alive, the nitya karma cannot be any more than a prayashchitta or expiatory act, the effect of sins committed in the past. An expiatory act, enjoined by a reason of a certain act of sin having been committed, is not the fruit of that sinful act. If, on the other hand, the pain of the expiatory act be the effect of the very sinful act which forms its occasion, then it would follow that the trouble and pain involved in the performance of the nitya karma occasioned by the man's being alive, etc., is the effect of that very state of being alive which has occasioned the necessity, the nitya karma and prayashchitta being alike necessitated by the particular occasion respectively. Moreover, the trouble and pain involved in the performance of a nitya agnihotra, fire worship done as a duty, and a kamya agnihotra, fire worship done with a motive, being equal, and no special reason being found as to why the trouble and pain involved in the performance of the nitya karma alone should constitute the result of sins committed in the past, but not the trouble and pain involved in the performance of the kamya karma, it would follow that the latter also is the result of sins committed in the past. Such being the case, it is wrong to infer, on the ground of consistency, arthpatti, that because no mention is made in the Shruti of the Nitya Karma's results and because the injunction thereof is otherwise inexplicable, the trouble and pain involved in the performance of the Nitya Karma is the result of sins committed in the past. The injunction being otherwise inexplicable, we should even infer that the Nitya Karma is productive of results distinct from the pain and trouble involved in its performance. The opponent is also guilty of inconsistency. When it is once admitted that through the performance of the Nitya Karma the fruit of another deed is reaped, this reaping forms itself the fruit of the Nitya Karma, and it is therefore inconsistent to hold at the same time that the Nitya Karma produces no fruits of its own. Moreover, when the Kamya Agnihotra is performed, the Nitya Agnihotra is also said to have been performed simultaneously, as included in that self-same act, and therefore the fruit of the Kamya Agnihotra should become exhausted with the trouble and pain involved in the Nitya Agnihotra, inasmuch as the Kamya Agnihotra is not a distinct act from the Nitya Agnihotra if, on the other hand, the effect of the Kamya Agnihotra be something distinct such as Swarga, then it would follow that the trouble and pain of its performance must also be distinct, but it is not so, for it is opposed to facts. In point of fact, the trouble and pain involved in the performance of the Nitya Karma is not distinct from that of the Kamya Karma. Furthermore, an action which is neither enjoined nor prohibited, in the Shruti, is productive of immediate results, but an act which is enjoined or prohibited by the Sastra cannot be productive of immediate result. If this latter were productive of immediate results, then no effort would be made with a view to attain an unseen result, even though it be Swarga or the like, so long as it is held that in the case of Agnihotra or the like, despite the absence of all distinction in the nature of the act, the fruits of the act when performed as a Nitya Karma are reaped in the form of the mere trouble and pain involved in its performance, whereas when performed as a Kamya Karma the self-same act produces a superior result such as Swarga merely because there is a longing for its results, although the latter act is not superior to the former in any of the subsidiary parts in the mode of performance. Wherefore it is in no way reasonable to contend that the Nitya Karma does not lead to results in the unseen future. The paths of knowledge and works are meant for distinct classes of aspirants. So, knowledge alone can cause total destruction of good or evil deeds caused by avidya, not the performance of the Nitya Karma. For, avidya and kama, nescience and desire, constitute the seed of all action. Accordingly it has been declared that Karma Yoga pertains to the ignorant and that Janananishtha or knowledge devotion accompanied with renunciation of all works pertains to the wise. From the last verse here quoted it should be inferred that ignorant men who are devoted to action cannot approach the Lord. And therefore, notwithstanding that ignorant men, who are followers of works, are most devout, rendering service to the Lord, they resort only to one of the several paths mentioned, in their descending order, the lowest of them being that which consists in abandoning the fruits of action. But as regards those who are devoted to the undefinable and the indestructible, the attributes they cultivate are mentioned in, and their path of knowledge is also described in the 3 discourses commencing with the 13th discourse on the Kshetra. The triple result of action, such as the evil, good and mixed fruit, 18.12, does not accrue to those who have renounced all works generated by the 5 causes such as the body, 18.14, who know that the self is one and non-agent, who are engaged in the higher devotion of knowledge, who have known the true nature of the Lord, to the Paramahamsa Parivrajkas, i.e., the Samnyasins of the fourth or highest order, who have obtained refuge in the unity of the Self and the Divine Being. But it does accrue to others who are ignorant, who follow the path of works, who are not Samnyasins. Thus should we assign the paths of duty taught in the Gita Sastra. Because the Nitya Karma, like the Kamya Karma, yields its fruits in the invisible future by way of taking the devotee to the regions of Pitris and the like. It is not intended for the removal of sins, and therefore self-knowledge alone, it must be admitted, conduces to the end. Action is a creature of avidya. Objection: it cannot be proved that all action is caused by avidya. Answer: no, it can be proved, as in the case of Brahmanicide, Brahmahatya. The Nitya Karma is no doubt taught in the Sastra, but it concerns the ignorant alone. Just as the act of Brahmanicide, which is prohibited in the Sastra, is known to be a source of evil, is committed only by him who is ignorant and influenced by passion and other evil tendencies, his concern in it being otherwise inexplicable, so also, all Nitya, Naimittika, and Kamya Karmas, i.e., all works comprising the constant and occasional duties as well as an interested sacrificial rites, concern only him who is ignorant of the self. Objection: so long as it is not known that the self is distinct from the body, it is not likely that any man would undertake to perform the Nitya Karma, etc. Answer: not so. For we see that a man engages in an act thinking, I do, the act, which, being of the nature of motion, is really done by the agency of the not self, of the body, etc. Question: the regarding of the aggregate of the body, etc., as the self is only a gona pratyaya or a figuratively expressed notion, it is not an illusion, mithya. Answer: not so, for then its effects, too, must be gona, must have been figuratively spoken of. To explain the objection, when we speak of the aggregate of the body, etc., which are things belonging to the self, as the self, our words should be understood in a figurative sense, as when, for instance, addressing the father the Shruti says, yourself art be, who is spoken of as your son. In common parlance, too, we say, this cow is my very life. In the present case there is certainly no mithya pratyaya or illusory notion. It is only when the distinction between the two is not perceived, as when a pillar is mistaken for a man, that we have an instance of illusion. To explain the answer, not so. A gona pratyaya cannot lead to a real effect, for a figurative expression, the sign of similarity being understood, is merely intended to extol the subject. For example, such expressions as Devadatta is a lion and the student is fire are intended merely to extol the subjects, Devdatta and the student, because of their respective resemblance to the lion and fire in point of fierceness and yellowishness, but no effect of the existence of a real lion or of a real fire is accomplished in virtue of that figurative expression or idea. On the other hand, one actually experiences the evil effects of an illusory notion. Furthermore, one knows what the subject in reality is when it is figuratively spoken of as some other thing. One knows that Devdatta is no lion and that the student is no fire. So also, if the bodily aggregate be figuratively spoken of as the self, the act done by the bodily aggregate would not be regarded as an act done in reality by the self, by the real subject of the notion, I. Indeed, no act done by a gona, figurative, lion or fire can become an act done by a real lion or fire. Neither is any purpose whatever of an actual lion or fire served by fierceness or yellowishness, it being merely intended to extol the subject. Moreover, he who is thus praised knows that he is not a lion, that he is not fire. He never regards an act of a lion or of fire as his. So, if in the present case the bodily aggregate were figuratively spoken of as the self, one would think rather that the act of the bodily aggregate is not mine, i.e., not the real self's, than that I am the agent, mine is the action. And as regards the theory that the self actually does an act, his memory, desire and effort forming causes of action, we say that such is not the case, because they proceed from illusion. In fact, memory, desire and effort proceed from impressions produced by the experience of desirable and undesirable effects of actions set up by illusion. Just as in this birth dharma and adharma and the experience of their fruits are due to the identifying of the self with the aggregate of the body, etc., to affection and aversion and so on, so also in the last previous birth and in the birth previous to that, and so on. Thus we are to infer that samsara, past and future, is caused by avidya and is without a beginning. Wherefore it follows that the final cessation of samsara is attained through devotion to knowledge accompanied with renunciation of all works. Because attachment to the body is an aspect of avidya, therefore, when avidya ceases, the body also must cease to be, and then samsara necessarily ceases. The identifying of the self with the aggregate of the body, etc., is an aspect of avidya, for nobody in the world who knows that he is distinct from a cow and sea, and that the cow and sea are distinct from him, regards them as himself. Only an ignorant man identifies the self with the aggregate of the body, etc., for want of discrimination, in the same way that one mistakes the branchless trunk of a tree for a man, but not he who knows the truth by discrimination. As to the Son being spoken of as the Father himself in the Shruti, yourself art he who is spoken of as your Son, it is a gona pratyaya, a figurative, expressed notion, because of their relation as the generator and the offspring. By what is only figuratively spoken of as the self, no real purposes of the true self can be accomplished, any more than the son can eat for the father. No real purposes, for instance, of a real lion and a real fire can be achieved by what are only figuratively spoken of as a lion and fire. Objection: since the scriptural ordinances are of undisputed authority in transcendental matters, the purposes of the self can certainly be achieved by what are figuratively spoken of as the self, viz., the body, the senses, and so on. Answer: no, for they are self set up by avidya. The body and the senses and the like are not figuratively spoken of as the self. On the other hand, being really not self, they are regarded as selves by illusion, for they are regarded as the self so long as there is illusion, and they cease to be regarded as the self when illusion disappears. It is only children, the ignorant people, who, for want of knowledge, think, I am tall, I am yellowish, and thus regard the aggregate of the body, etc., as the self. On the other hand, those who can discriminate and understand that I am distinct from the aggregate of the body, etc., do not identify themselves with the aggregate of the body, etc. This notion of identity is therefore because it does not exist in the absence of illusion caused by illusion, and it is not a gona pratyaya. It is only when similarity and difference are distinctly seen between two things, as between a lion and Devdutt, or between a student and fire, that those two things may be figuratively spoken of in word as identical or so regarded in thought, but not when similarity and difference are not perceived. And as regards the appeal made to the authority of Shruti, we say that no such appeal should be made, inasmuch as Shruti is an authority in transcendental matters, in matters lying beyond the bounds of human knowledge. Shruti is an authority only in matters not perceived by means of ordinary instruments of knowledge, such as pratyaksha or immediate perception, i.e., it is an authority as to the mutual relation of things as means to ends, but not in matters lying within the range of pratyaksha. Indeed, Shruti is intended as authority only for knowing what lies beyond the range of human knowledge. Wherefore it is not possible to suppose that the notion of I, which arises in connection with the aggregate of the body, etc., and which is evidently due to illusion, is only a figurative idea. 100 Shrutis may declare that fire is cold or that it is dark, still they possess no authority in the matter. If Shruti should at all declare that fire is cold or that it is dark, we would still suppose that it intends quite a different meaning from the apparent one, for its authority cannot otherwise be maintained. We should in no way attach to Shruti a meaning which is opposed to other authorities or to its own declaration. The theory of avidya does not militate against the authority of karmakanda. Objection - as a man does an action only when he is subject to illusion, it would follow that when he ceases to be an agent the Shruti, which treats of works, would prove false. Answer: no, for Shruti is still true in the matter of Brahmavidya. Objection - if the Shruti which treats of work should be no authority, the Shruti which teaches Brahmavidya too can be no authority. Answer: not so, for there can arise no notion that can remove Brahmavidya. The notion that the self is identical with the aggregate of the body, etc., is removed when the true nature of the self is known from the Shruti which teaches Brahmavidya, but not so can this knowledge of the true self be ever removed in any way by anything whatsoever, for knowledge of the self is necessarily associated with its result, i.e., the absence of avidya, like the knowledge that fire is hot and luminous. Our theory, moreover, does not drive us to the conclusion that the Shruti teaching works proves useless, for by restraining the first natural activities one by one and thereby gradually inducing fresh and higher activities, it serves to create an aspiration to reach the innermost self. Though the means is mithya or illusory, still it is true, because the end is true, as in the case of the arthavadas or explanatory statements subsidiary to a main injunction. And even in ordinary affairs, when we have to induce a child or a lunatic to drink milk or the like, we have to tell him that thereby his hair will grow, and so on. Or, we may even argue that the Shruti treating of works is an authority in itself. Under other circumstances, i.e., before the attainment of self-knowledge, just as pratyaksha or sense perception caused by attachment to the body is held to be authoritative prior to the attainment of self-knowledge. Refutation of the theory of the self's agency by mere presence. Another theory runs as follows: though not directly engaged in action, the self does act by mere presence. This by itself constitutes the real agency of the self. A king, for instance, though himself not acting, is said to fight when his soldiers fight, in virtue of his mere presence, and he is said to be victorious or defeated. Similarly, the commander of an army acts by mere word. And we find that the king and the commander are connected with the results of the act. To take another example, the acts of the Ritviks or officiating priests are supposed to belong to the Yajmana or sacrificer. So the acts of the body, etc., we may hold, are done by the self, inasmuch as their results accrue to the self. To take yet another example, since the lodestone or magnet makes a piece of iron revolve, real agency may rest with what is not actually engaged in an act. And so also in the case of the self. We reply, it is not right to say so, for it would be tantamount to saying that that which does not act is a karaka or an agent. The opponent says yes, karaka or agency may be of various kinds. We reply, no, for we find that the king, etc., as in stanza above, are direct agents also. In the first place, the king may be personally engaged in fighting. He is a direct agent as causing others to fight, as paying them wages, and also as reaping the fruits accruing from success and defeat. The sacrificer, too, is a real agent as offering the main oblation and as giving presents, wherefore, we should understand that to speak, by courtesy, of a man as an agent when he is not actually engaged, amounts to a figure of speech. If real agency, which consists in one being actually engaged in the act, were not found in the case of such agents as the king and the sacrificer, then we might suppose that even agency by mere presence constitutes real agency, as in the case of a magnet causing a piece of iron to revolve. On the contrary, we do find the king and the sacrificer actually engaged in some acts. Wherefore agency by mere presence is merely a gona or figurative agency. Such being the case, even the connection with results can only be gona or unreal. By a gona or figurative agent no real action is performed. Therefore it is quite unreasonable to say that the activity of the body, etc., makes the actionless self a real doer and enjoyer. The theory of avidya concluded. But all this becomes explicable when traced to illusion as its case, as in the case of dreams and the juggler's art, Maya. And no agency or enjoyership or any other evil of the sort is experienced in sleep, samadhi and similar states in which there is a break in the continuity of the illusory notions identifying the self with the body, etc. Wherefore the illusion of samsara is due solely to an illusory notion and is not absolutely real. Therefore we conclude that right knowledge conduces to absolute cessation of samsara. Qualification for instruction in the Gita doctrine. Having concluded the whole doctrine of the Gita Sastra in this discourse, and having also briefly and conclusively started the doctrine especially here at the end to impress it the more firmly, the Lord proceeds now to state the rule as to the handing down of the instruction.
Idam te na tapaskaya na bhaktaya kadachana na cha shushrusha vacyam na cha mam yobhyasuyate.
Translation. This, which has been taught to you, is never to be taught to one who is devoid of austerities, nor to one who is not devoted, nor to one who does not do service, nor to one who speaks ill of me. This sastra has been taught to you by me for your good, for the destruction of samsara. Not devoted, without devotion to the Guru and to the Deva. Never, under no circumstances whatever. It should not be declared to him who devoted and full of austerities as he may be, renders no service. One speaks ill of me, he who looks upon me, Vasudeva, as an ordinary man, and who in his ignorance declares me guilty of self-adulation and does not like to be told that I am the Isvara. He, too, is not fit, and the Sastra should not be taught to hint. By implication we should understand that the Sastra is to be taught to him who does not speak ill of the Lord, who is a man of austerities, who is devoted, and who renders service. Now as it has been elsewhere said that it should be taught either to a man of austerities, or to an intelligent man, it should be declared to a man of austerities who is devoted and renders service, or to an intelligent man possessed of the two attributes. It should not be taught to a man of austerities or to an intelligent man if he is not devoted and does not render service. It should not be taught to him who is jealous of the Lord, though he may be possessed of all attributes. It should be taught to one who is devoted and renders service to the Guru. This is the rule as to how the Sastra should be handed down. The merit of teaching the doctrine. Now the Lord proceeds to state what fruits will accrue to him who hands down the instruction.
Ya idam paramam guhyam madbhakteshvabhidhasyati bhaktim mayi param krutva mame vaishyatya samshayah.
Translation. He who with supreme devotion to me will teach this supreme secret to my devotees, shall doubtless come to me. This supreme secret, the secret doctrine taught above in the form of a dialogue between Kesava and Arjuna. It is supreme because it conduces to the highest bliss. Teach, establish by teaching both the text itself and the doctrine, as I have established it by teaching it to you. By repetition of devotion, here it is meant that by devotion alone one becomes worthy of being taught the Sastra. How should he teach it? I in the faith that he is thus doing service to the eternal Lord, to the Paramaguru, the supreme teacher. As the fruit of this act, such a teacher will go to the Lord, he will be liberated.
न च तस्मान् मनुष्येषु कश्चिन्मे प्रियकृत्तमः भविता न च मे तस्मादन्यः प्रियतरो भुवि.
Translation. Nor is there any among men who does dearer service to me than he, nor shall there be another on earth dearer to me than he. Nor, etc., there is none in the present generation. He, the man who hands down the Sastra, shall be, in future time, on earth, in the world.
Adhyeshyate cha yaimam dharmyam samvadamavayoh jnana yagnena tenahamishtasyamiti me matihi.
Translation. And he who will study this sacred dialogue of ours, by him I shall have been worshipped by the sacrifice of wisdom, I deem. Dialogue, this work which is in the form of a dialogue. Of the four kinds of sacrifice such as vidhi or ritual, japa or a loud prayer, upamsu or a prayer uttered in a low voice, mantra or a prayer offered with the mind, the jananayagna or wisdom sacrifice comes under the head of mansa and is therefore the highest. Thus the Gita Sastra is extolled as a Jananayajna. Or, we may regard this passage as revealing what the real effect of the act enjoined here is, viz., that the act will produce an effect equal to that of wisdom sacrifice, of the contemplation of a devta or the like. The merit of hearing the doctrine. The benefit accruing to the hearer is stated as follows.
Shraddhavananasuyascha shrunuyadapi yo naraha सोऽपि मुक्तः शुभालोकान् प्राप्नुयात् पुण्यकर्मणाम्.
Translation. And the man also who hears, full of faith and free from malice, even he, liberated, shall attain to the happy worlds of the righteous. Even he, much more so he who understands the doctrine. Liberated from sin. The righteous, those who have performed Agnihotra or such other sacrifices. The Lord assured by Arjuna of his grasp of the teaching. The Lord now asks with a desire to know whether the pupil has understood or not the teaching of the Shastra, the object of the question being that he might make the pupil understand the teaching by some other means, if the latter be found to have not understood it. And this is to show that it is the duty of the teacher to try again to make the pupil understand the teaching and enable him to attain his object.
कच्चिदेतच्छ्रुतम् पार्थ त्वयैकाग्रेण चेतसा कच्चिदज्ञानसम्मोहः प्रनष्टस्ते धनञ्जय.
Translation. Has it been heard by you, O Parth, with an attentive mind? Has the delusion of ignorance been destroyed, O Dhananjaya? What I have told you. Heard, have you heard it without distraction and understood? Delusion of ignorance, that absence of discrimination which is caused by ignorance and which is natural. Has your delusion been destroyed? Its destruction is the object of all this exertion on your part to hear the Shastra and of the exertion on my part as the teacher.
Arjuna uvacha Nashto moha smritirlabdha tvatprasadanmayachyuta Sthitosmi gata sandehah karishye vachanam tava.
Translation. Arjuna said, destroyed is delusion, and I have gained recognition through your grace, O Achyuta. I am firm, with doubts gone. I will do your word. Delusion, born of Ajnana or ignorance, the cause of the whole evil of samsara, hard to cross like the ocean, I, who have sought your grace. Recognition of the true nature of the self. When this recognition is obtained, then will all the ties of the heart be loosened. This questioning and answering about the destruction of delusion shows conclusively what the purpose of the knowledge of the teaching of the whole Shastra is, namely, the destruction of delusion and the attainment of a recognition of the self. So the Shruti begins with the words, not knowing the self, I grieve, and then speaks of the loosening of all ties by means to self-knowledge. There are also scriptural passages such as, the tie of the heart is broken, and, to him who sees unity, what delusion is there, what grief, I am firm, in your command. Do your word, Arjuna means to say, through your grace I have achieved the end of life, I have naught to do. Sanjay extols the Lord and his teaching. The teaching of the Shastra is over. Now in order to connect it with the main narrative, Sanjay goes on.
Sanjaya uvacha Ityaham vasudevasya parthasya cha mahatmanaha Samvadamimam ashrosha madbhutam romaharshanam.
Translation. Sanjay said, thus have I heard this wonderful dialogue between Vasudeva and the high-souled Parth, which makes the hair stand on end.
Vyasa prasadat shrutavanetad guhyamaham param Yogam yogeshwarat krishnat sakshat kathayatah swayam.
Translation. Through the grace of Vyasa have I heard this supreme and most secret yoga direct from Krishna, the Lord of Yoga, himself declaring it. Through the grace of Vyasa, by obtaining from him the Divyachakshus or divine vision. Yoga, this dialogue, the work is called yoga because it leads to yoga. Or, the word may mean yoga itself. Himself, it is not through mere tradition that I have heard it.
Rajan samsmritya samvadamimam Keshavarjunayoh punyam hrishyami cha muhurmuhuh.
Translation. O King, remembering every moment this wonderful and holy dialogue between Kesava and Arjuna, I rejoice again and again. King, Dhritarashtra. Holy, as the mere hearing of it destroys sin.
Taccha samsmritya rupamatyadbhutam harehe Vismayo me mahan rajan hrishyami cha punah punah.
Translation. And remembering every moment the most wonderful form of Hari, great is my wonder, O King, and I rejoice again and again. Form, Vishwarupa, the universal form. Not to dilate much.
Yatra yogeshwarah krishno yatra partho dhanurdharah Tatra shri vijayo bhutir dhruva mama.
Translation. Wherever is Krishna, the Lord of Yoga, wherever is Arjuna, the archer, their fortune, victory, prosperity and polity are established, I deem. Wherever, on that side on which. The Lord of Yoga, he is the Lord of Yogas, since the seed of all yoga comes forth from him. Archer, wielding the bow called the Gandiva. There, on the side of the Pandavas. Prosperity, increase of fortune.
Om Tatsaditi Srimad Bhagavadgitasu Upanishadsu Brahma Vidyayam Yoga Shastre Shri Krishna Arjuna Samvade Moksha Sannyasa Yogo Nama Ashtadashodhyayah. Shantakaram bhujagashayanam padmanabham suresham Vishwadharam gaganasadrisham meghavarnam shubhangam Lakshmikantam kamalanayanam yogibhirdhyanagamyam Vande Vishnum bhavabhayaharam sarvalokaikanaatham Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Thank you for watching. Please support us. Please like, share, subscribe.